Chapter 224. The moment the blood-robed youth died, an extremely terrifying aura burst forth from Black Crow Mountain that was hundreds of thousands of kilometers away, as though the apocalypse had arrived. Every single living being on Black Crow Mountain was scared out of their wits as they sprawled on the ground motionlessly. "Who is it? Who is it? How dare you kill my disciple?" In the depths of Black Crow Mountain, a deep and sinister roar sounded from a gigantic palace that was filled with endless killing intent and rage. "I'm going to tear you into pieces and grind your bones to dust." Boom! Accompanied by a deafening explosion, the entire palace shook violently as the blood mist in the surroundings turned thicker, almost materializing. The entire palace seemed to be floating in the blood sea, faintly discernible. A figure charged out from the palace and suddenly opened his mouth, sucking in a deep breath. Splash! The blood sea surged, forming a gigantic vortex as seawater surged endlessly into the figure's open mouth. In the blink of an eye, the surrounding blood sea vanished. A middle-aged man stood in midair. His black hair draped over his shoulders and his face was thin. Wearing a dark red robe, his eyes were dark green and shone with a sinister glint. Caw! Caw! Suddenly, an ear-piercing cry sounded from Black Crow Mountain. Initially, the cry was far away in the horizon. However, in the blink of an eye, it had already arrived. A gigantic, pitch-black crow with bloodshot eyes flapped its wings and streaked across the skies above Black Crow Mountain, speeding over. This was the king of the many blood-eyed crows in Black Crow Mountain. The Blood Crow King. When the palace lord first arrived at Black Crow Mountain, this crow was the first one he subdued. The crow had obtained quite a bit of benefits from following the palace lord, and its current cultivation was already equivalent to the peak of nascent soul realm. Master! The Blood Crow King arrived above the palace and suddenly descended. By the time he landed on the ground, he had already transformed into a black-robed cultivator who knelt on the ground with a respectful expression. "Come, follow me for a spin." The palace lord's gaze was cold as he said coldly, "I want to see who dares to touch my disciple. I want him to pay with his blood, Dongling Valley." The blood-robed youth was dead, lying in a pool of blood. The 3 rounds had only lasted for a few breaths of time. The time was too short. The 2 perfected Gene Dan cultivators who had come to provide support had yet to arrive. They were too far away to save the blood-robed youth. Seeing this, the 2 Gene Dan perfected masters were dumbfounded. The 2 of them seemed to have thought of something terrifying. Their faces suddenly became incomparably pale and extremely unsightly. Their bodies faintly trembled. The blood-robed youth was the only true disciple of the Blood Crow Palace Lord. They had escorted the blood-robed youth to Dongling Valley. Now that the blood-robed youth had died tragically here, there was a high chance that Blood Crow Palace's lord would target them first in his rage. Their only chance of survival was the green-robed cultivator not far away. Only by capturing this person alive and escorting him to the palace lord of Blood Crow Palace would they have any hope of survival. Whoosh! Whoosh! Their eyes were red, and their faces were full of murderous intent. The spiritual power in their dantian was crazily circulating, and their speed was pushed to the limit as they rushed towards Su Zimo. On the other side, Su Zimo had expended almost all of his remaining stamina after killing the blood-robed youth in 3 moves and was panting heavily. Be it the connection, strength, or timing of those 3 moves, he was already at the limit of what he could unleash. In a head-on clash, he managed to kill a 4 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator in a one-on-one fight. Even if Su Zimo was in his peak condition, he might not be able to achieve such results. If not for the fact that he had attained lesser mastery of the organ's refinement section and released a strong power of blood chi, coupled with the blood-robed youth's weakness, the outcome of this battle would have been hard to predict. After killing the blood-robed youth, Su Zimo turned back to look at the 2 Gene Dan perfected masters not far away with a mocking look in his eyes. Swoosh! Su Zimo's sleeves trembled and a supreme-grade flying sword shot out. Shing! Using the flying sword, Su Zimo first cut open Yu Fei's chest and retrieved the demon beast inner core within. At the same time, he grabbed their storage bags and tossed them into his own. Thereafter, his sword sped forward and sliced off the blood-robed youth's head. He's already dead and his head is with me. Come and get it if you want, ha 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 ha. Gripping the blood-robed youth's head in his hands, Su Zimo reared his head and laughed maniacally. His voice was loud and clear, spreading in all directions. Because Su Zimo was standing rather far away, he was already close to the edge of Dongling Valley. Coupled with the fact that he killed the blood-robed youth in 3 moves, it was so fast that apart from the 2 Jin Dan perfected masters who were rushing over, no one else noticed it. But now, Su Zimo's voice reverberated through Dongling Valley and everyone heard it loud and clear. There was a momentary pause in the fight between the cultivators on both sides. Be it the cultivators of Blood Crow Palace or the Misty Peak disciples, all of them glanced in Su Zimo's direction instinctively. Immediately after, everyone's expressions changed starkly. However, the Misty Peak disciples revealed looks of joy. As for the Blood Crow Palace cultivators, their faces were pale as though they had lost their parents. Capture that man alive. Don't let him escape. Peng Yu roared. There were only 8 perfected masters of Jin Dan of Blood Crow Palace who were initially surrounding Wen Xian and Elder Yu. Now that they heard Peng Yu's roar, another 2 Jin Dan perfected masters left the battlefield and sprinted in the direction of Su Zimo with a thunderous might. Poof! 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 The pressure on Wen Xian decreased and he took advantage of the distraction of one of the Jin Dan perfected masters to release the power of phenomenon. Numerous fine raindrops fell on this person's body, instantly piercing countless bloody holes in his body, causing him to be riddled with holes. That person's eyes dimmed as he fell from midair. Peng Yu grit his teeth. Initially, he wanted to capture Su Zimo personally. But now, he could only stay where he was. Swallowing a huge mouthful of elixirs, Peng Yu circulated his spirit energy furiously and unleashed a torrential attack. He wanted to kill Wen Xian and Elder Yu as soon as possible. In the skies, the blood-eyed crows that were initially surrounding the remaining 40-odd Misty Peak disciples were now charging towards Su Zimo with bloodshot eyes. More than half of the hundreds of Foundation establishment cultivators of Blood Crow Palace had also moved away. With that, the pressure on everyone from Misty Peak decreased significantly. Suddenly, everyone saw a glimmer of hope, a ray of hope. Due to the death of the blood-robed youth, the entire situation changed slightly. The battlefield was in chaos. No matter what, Qin Yu and Ji Qingtian were both legacy disciples of Misty Peak. One was at 5 Meridian Foundation Establishment while the other was at 4 Meridian Foundation Establishment. They were extremely strong. As long as they could make use of this opportunity to kill their way out of Dongling Valley and send a message to the sect, they would have a chance of survival. On the other side, 4 Jin Dan perfected masters had already charged towards Su Zimo. The blood-eyed crows in the skies charged over together with most of the Foundation Establishment cultivators on the ground. Such a vast and mighty army had practically formed a raging wave that was surging over. In the face of that wave, Su Zimo seemed incomparably insignificant and was almost drowned by the dense crowd and blood-eyed crows. It was easy to imagine what would happen to him. Chapter 225. Qin Yu turned to look in Su Zimo's direction with a conflicted gaze and clenched his fists. Bro! Little Fatty could not help but exclaim. Leng Ro could not bear to watch. Everyone from Misty Peak knew that this slim chance of survival was fought for by Su Zimo single-handedly. Right now, there was no longer any perfected being Jin Dan who cared about their lives. Even the number of Foundation Establishment cultivators blocking their path had decreased by more than half. Almost everyone's attention was drawn to Su Zimo. Hurry, let's go. Qin Yu grit his teeth and waved his arm, hollering. At this moment, indecisiveness and hesitation would only cause everyone's deaths. Qin Yu and Ji Qingtian worked together and walked at the front, releasing spirit arts continuously. Enhanced by the sect's secret skill, the flying swords shuttled through the battlefield and blood splattered everywhere. Although everyone from Misty Peak was covered in injuries, they endured their pain and pulled themselves together, following closely behind the two of them and killing their way out of Dongling Valley. On the other side, Su Zimo was in a terrible state. Previously, he had expended almost all the spirit energy in his Dantian when he released the Fiend's suppression seal. Thereafter, he was mentally and physically exhausted after resisting the corrosion of blood slave art. Finally, he burst forth with his peak state and killed the blood-robed youth cleanly in 3 rounds, expending the last of his stamina. Right now, Su Zimo was at his weakest. Not far away, the 4 perfected being Jean Dan sped over with murderous auras. Dense swarms of blood-eyed crows and hundreds of Blood Crow Palace Foundation establishment cultivators swarmed over. Dust billowed and killing intent filled the air. Even under such circumstances, Su Zimo's face did not show any signs of panic, his eyes were calm and his expression was calm. He was channeling a secret skill. There was a blood refinement Fiend Sutra recorded on the lid of the stone coffin in the inheritance ground of the Fiend sections. That secret skill originated from the Blood Refinement Fiend Sutra and was called Blood Escape. The Blood Refinement Fiend Sutra was all about the usage of bloodlines and described how to activate the power of one's bloodline. The Blood Escape technique was no exception. Once the Blood Escape technique was released, a third of the bloodline would be burned in exchange for a burst of speed for a short period of time, allowing the user to escape 1,000 miles away. Of course, the Blood Escape technique also had very obvious side effects. After 1/3 of their bloodline was burnt, both human beings and demons would become extremely weak. Their limbs would turn cold, and they would find it difficult to breathe. They might even pass out. How long this state of weakness would last depended on one's physique. The stronger one's physique was, the shorter the time it would take to return to normal. But if there were no accidents, it would take at least 10 days to half a month of recuperation to completely recover. Su Zimo had no choice but to turn around and flee. However, the direction behind him was the opposite of Misty Peak. If he really used Blood Escape, the distance between Su Zimo and Misty Peak would only increase. Su Zimo had no choice but to turn around and flee. Su Zimo circulated the Heart Sutra of the Blood Escape art. Forming a hand seal, he bit the tip of his tongue and spat out a stream of essence blood. Dong! 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 Suddenly, Su Zimo's heart thumped violently, as though it was about to leap out of his chest. It was deep and powerful, as though someone was beating a heavenly drum. With every beat of his heart, a stream of scarlet blood would flow through his limbs and bones. A faint layer of flames burned on the surface of the blood. It was extremely strange and exuded endless power. Taking a deep breath of air, Su Zimo turned around and released Divine Steed Fleeting, sprinting out of Dongling Valley. Swash! Su Zimo turned into a streak of blood light and disappeared from everyone's sights in the blink of an eye. It was too fast. Everyone was stunned for a moment and their eyes were dazed. After a few breaths, the 4 perfected Jean Dan were the first to react. They burst forth with full speed and chased in the direction Su Zimo had disappeared in. A secret skill as such must exhaust the potential of a living being in exchange for a temporary burst of power. That lad won't be able to last long. Let's chase after him. That's right. That lad will definitely become extremely weak once he stops using a secret skill as such. The few perfected Jean Dan in midair had sharp eyes and saw through the nature of Blood Escape before long. One of the Jean Dan perfected beings hollered, "Blood Crow Army, find traces of that man. Don't alarm him after you find him. Just follow him and wait for our reinforcements." Caw! Caw! An ear-piercing cry sounded from the blood-eyed crows that filled the skies, as though they were responding. Soon after, the many blood-eyed crows entered the void, disappearing without a trace. Although the blood-eyed crows were only Foundation Establishment spirit demons, their speed in midair was not inferior to that of perfected Jean Dan. Su Zimo sprinted with all his might. Although he did not turn back to look, Su Zimo could guess that this group of cultivators of unknown origins would definitely not give up and would be following him closely. The blood in his body was still burning. Su Zimo had to escape from everyone's pursuit after a third of his blood was burned. Blood escape could increase one's speed by a few times in a short period of time. However, the increase was not limitless, it was based on the cultivator's foundation. After all, Su Zimo was only a foundation establishment cultivator. In other words, Su Zimo might not be able to surpass perfected Jin Dan in terms of speed after using blood escape. Perfected Jin Dan's cultivation realm was a level higher than his. Before long, Su Zimo arrived at a dense forest. After sprinting for a while, Su Zimo suddenly stopped in his tracks. In a flash, he pounced towards a leopard that could not dodge in time. That leopard could only be considered as a wild beast that had just gained sentience. Although there was some spirituality in its eyes, it did not know how to cultivate yet. Su Zimo coiled the blood-robed youth's head around the leopard's tail and threatened, "Run as far as you can. Don't take it off in the middle." Sensing the killing intent in Su Zimo's eyes, the leopard was so scared that its heart skipped a beat and it nodded hurriedly. Su Zimo released his grip and the leopard left the place in fear. When it was far enough away, it fled as fast as it could. Su Zimo turned back and sneered. He had to do something to distract his pursuers. Su Zimo believed that the leopard would be enough to distract his pursuers and cause them to be confused so that they would not be able to determine his escape route. Su Zimo took a deep breath and continued sprinting forward. After an unknown amount of time, the power of the blood escape technique had been exhausted. This meant that a third of Su Zimo's blood had been burned. The moment Su Zimo came to a stop, he felt the world spin and he almost fell to the ground. Su Zimo adjusted his breathing and clenched his fists, trying his best to keep his mind clear as he staggered forward. He could not fall asleep just like that. He was not truly out of danger yet. He had to find a relatively secluded place and set up some simple formations so that Su Zimo could hide without worry. Before long, Su Zimo found a cave at the foot of a mountain not far away. Su Zimo walked around inside and heaved a sigh of relief when he did not discover any other demon beasts. Given his current state, he would have to fight a tough battle even if he encountered a spirit beast. Chapter 226. Su Zimo fell to the ground, feeling as though his tendons and bones were about to break. Enduring the pain, he carefully retrieved Night Spirit from his robes and hugged it to his chest. He was worried about Night Spirit. Even though Yu Fei's throat was crushed and he lost a large amount of blood qi, he was a Jin Dan realm spirit demon after all. His final counterattack was extremely terrifying. Even if Su Zimo was in Night Spirit's shoes, he could not guarantee that he would survive. However, when Su Zimo took out Night Spirit, he was stunned. In Dongling Valley, Su Zimo witnessed with his own eyes that Night Spirit was struck in the waist by Yu Fei. Its body was contorted and it coughed out blood. It was clear that its organs were severely injured and its fate was unknown. But now, Night Spirit's body had returned to normal. Night Spirit curled up in front of Su Zimo's chest. It was no longer bleeding from its mouth and its breathing was slow and steady. Sensing Su Zimo's gaze, Night Spirit suddenly raised its head and blinked its beady eyes. They were pitch black and resembled gemstones as it looked at Su Zimo spiritually. The man and beast looked at each other. Ha! When he saw that Night Spirit was fine, Su Zimo was delighted and could not help but laugh. Hia! As though it could sense the joy in Su Zimo's heart, Night Spirit opened its mouth slightly and called out in response. Su Zimo carried Night Spirit and checked it carefully. To his surprise, Su Zimo discovered that Night Spirit's self-healing abilities were extremely strong. Although it had yet to recover, the wounds in its organs were already healing and its broken bones were reconnecting. Ever since it escaped from Dongling Valley, Night Spirit had not consumed any elixirs and was relying solely on its own body to recover and adjust. It had been less than a month since Night Spirit was born, of course, the greater the potential of night spirit, the harsher the conditions for growth. If they were dire beast cubs, their parents would also be powerful pure-blooded dire beasts. They would be able to prepare sufficient food and resources for their cubs. And now, Su Zimo was only a foundation establishment middle-stage cultivator. There wasn't much he could provide for the night spirit. Su Zimo took out Yu Fei's inner core from his storage bag and placed it under the night spirit's nose, wanting to feed it. Just now, if it weren't for the night spirit's attack, he would have been reduced to a blood slave of the blood-robed young man. Therefore, Su Zimo did not hesitate or feel any heartache when he fed the night spirit the monster core. Night spirit's nose twitched, and he sneezed. He turned his head away and pursed his lips. His eyes were filled with disdain. Seeing this scene, Su Zimo was a little speechless. That monster core could be considered as his most precious item from head to toe. To think that the other party wouldn't even fancy it. You must be crazy to not want to eat something so good. After escaping death and seeing that night spirit had survived, Su Zimo was in a great mood. He could not help but curse jokingly and put away the demon beast's inner core, preparing to consume it later on. I'll put you down first. I'll go out and set up some formations. Let's hide here for a couple of days. Su Zimo said to Night Spirit. Unexpectedly, Night Spirit arched its body and tried to burrow into Su Zimo's embrace, as though that was the most comfortable place. Su Zimo could not tolerate it and stuffed it back into his embrace. He went to the entrance of the cave and started setting up formations. After burning a third of his blood, Su Zimo was extremely weak. However, he did not dare to rest. He had to seize every second to set up a few formations so that Su Zimo could be at ease. After drawing a few formation patterns, Su Zimo suddenly stopped and a strange feeling surfaced in his mind. It was as though he was being targeted. There was no danger and there were no warning signs. However, Su Zimo felt that something was amiss. It was as though there was a pair of eyes watching him from a hidden corner. Su Zimo continued drawing formation patterns without batting an eyelid. However, most of his attention and gaze were patrolling the surroundings constantly, trying to find the source of that ominous feeling. After a while, Su Zimo found nothing. Am I hallucinating? Su Zimo's gaze flickered as he frowned in deep thought. It would be fine if it was a hallucination. However, if it wasn't, right then, Su Zimo's chest moved and Night Spirit popped its head out. Hia! Night Spirit called out. Su Zimo was deep in thought and did not pay attention to Night Spirit's cries. Hia! Hia! After a while, when Su Zimo ignored it, Night Spirit called out again and stomped gently on Su Zimo's chest with its meaty paws. However, it did not extend its sharp claws. What's wrong? Su Zimo snapped out of his trance and lowered his head to ask. Night Spirit raised its head and looked in the direction of the skies with a cold gaze. In its pitch-black eyes, an imperceptible dot was vaguely reflected. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat as he raised his head. Above the firmaments, there was a black dot hidden in the clouds that was faintly discernible. At this distance, ordinary foundation establishment cultivators would not be able to see what was circling in the skies with their eyesight. However, Su Zimo's eyesight was extremely strong and he could already tell that the black dot was a blood-eyed crow. Not only that, there were even more black dots gathering in this direction within the clouds. With the blood-eyed crow as a guide, perfected Jean Dan would find this place before long. Suddenly, Su Zimo felt a chill run down his spine. He did not manage to shake off his pursuers at all. If he had not sensed that something was amiss and Night Spirit had not discovered the source, he might have been surrounded and killed here without even knowing how he died. Run! Su Zimo's first reaction was to continue running. However, the world was huge, where could he run to? There were way too many blood-eyed crows. Coupled with their fast speed and sharp sense of smell, Su Zimo would not be able to avoid the fate of being caught no matter where he fled to. The blood-eyed crows were the other party's eyes and were everywhere. This meant that Su Zimo was constantly under the other party's surveillance. There was nowhere to run. Furthermore, Su Zimo was in an extremely bad state right now. He had yet to recover from the blood he burned earlier on and was already exhausted. What should he do? Su Zimo closed his eyes and tried his best to compose himself as he tried to think of a way to break out of this situation. He believed that there had to be a way to avoid the blood-eyed crow's surveillance. A moment later, Su Zimo opened his eyes. He already had an idea. Su Zimo withdrew the demon beast inner core from his storage bag and swallowed it. Su Zimo was prepared to release blood escape once more. Using blood escape twice in a row meant that 2/3 of his blood would be burned and there was a high chance that he would die. However, Su Zimo had no other choice. He could only consume the demon beast inner core in advance in case of any accidents. Su Zimo was already at his weakest. If he did not release blood escape, he would not be able to escape far and would definitely be caught by perfected Jin Dan. Su Zimo withdrew the map from his storage bag and studied it carefully. Before long, Su Zimo put away the map and channeled blood escape. Transforming into a streak of blood light, he changed his direction slightly and sprinted. Chapter 227. This time round, Su Zimo was no longer fleeing aimlessly. There was only one place to avoid the blood-eyed crow's surveillance. Jishui River. After all, the blood-eyed crows were only Foundation establishment spirit demons and had yet to form their inner cores. They could not convert their external breathing into internal breathing and naturally could not enter Jishui River. However, Su Zimo was different. He cultivated both immortality and demonic. Although he did not have an inner core, he could use spirit energy to form a light barrier around his body to isolate the river water. The map showed that Jishui River ran through the entire territory of the Great Zhou dynasty. No one knew where Jishui River flowed to or where its source was, and it was not shown on the map either. However, that was not important. What Su Zimo had to do was to enter Jishui River and follow the flow. That way, he would be able to avoid the blood-eyed crow's tracking. He sprinted the entire way, chasing after the stars and moon. By the next morning, he finally arrived at the banks of Jishui River. The moment he arrived, Su Zimo's face was pale and his consciousness was fading. If not for the fact that Su Zimo had consumed the demon beast's inner core beforehand and executed blood escape twice in a row, he would have been a dead man by now. No matter how strong his physique was, he would not be able to withstand burning 2/3 of his essence blood. This time round, his body was almost completely drained. Su Zimo staggered and lost his balance. Unable to control his body, he fell forward and fell into the river. Gurgle, gurgle. A series of bubbles appeared on the surface of the river. Su Zimo was stirred by the river water and shook his head. Struggling to stand up, he regained some of his consciousness. Night Spirit burrowed out of Su Zimo's embrace and floated in the river for a while. By the looks of it, Night Spirit was rather good in the water as well. Gritting his teeth, Su Zimo hugged Night Spirit and forcefully conjured a spirit energy barrier. With a leap, he disappeared into Jishui River. The river water was cold. For someone who had burned more than half of his bloodline, that coldness had already turned into a bone-chilling chill. Su Zimo's body was trembling. His eyes were wide open as he held on to Night Spirit and continued to dive. Su Zimo forcefully raised his spirit and did not dare to be careless. He held the supreme-grade flying sword in his left hand and constantly patrolled the surroundings. The Jishui River was not a good place. The degree of danger here was definitely not any less than that of the Great Desolate Jungle. There were also many powerful demonic beasts living in the Jishui River. If he was the slightest bit careless, he could very well be buried here. Su Zimo did not dare to dive too deep. Normally, the deeper the river, the stronger the demonic beasts that appeared. Right now, Su Zimo was surrounded by mostly chi condensation spiritual beasts that had just begun to cultivate. There were so many different types of aquatic demons that it was a dazzling sight. These spirit beasts only glanced at him from afar. None of them dared to approach him. Suddenly, these spirit beasts seemed to have been frightened by something as they scattered and fled at an extremely fast speed. At the same time, Su Zimo was alarmed. Diagonally, the river water surged and a huge water column came against the current. It was murderous and mighty. A spirit demon. A Foundation establishment spirit demon had appeared. Clang! 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 Su Zimo endured the piercing pain in his dantian and injected spirit energy forcefully. The sword trembled continuously. Su Zimo activated the supreme grade flying sword right away, wanting to have a bloody battle with the spirit demon. However, his heart skipped a beat and he put away the flying sword. Whoosh! The spirit beast separated from the water and Su Zimo saw it clearly this time round. Green armored crocodile. The green armored crocodile was one of the more common demon beasts in the Jishui River. It was named the green armored crocodile because of the horn that was wrapped around its body that was indestructible like armor. The green armored crocodile was extremely fast in the water and arrived before Su Zimo in almost the blink of an eye. At that moment, Su Zimo felt as though he was not facing an aquatic demon beast, but a mountain. Swoosh! When the green armored crocodile arrived before Su Zimo, it opened its gigantic mouth without hesitation and swallowed Su Zimo with ease along with the river water. Standing in the mouth of the green armored crocodile, Su Zimo looked incomparably tiny but extremely calm. Seeing that the jaws of the green armored crocodile were about to close, Su Zimo took out his supreme grade flying sword once more and activated the 4 spirit patterns on it. He said coldly, "You'd better not move." At that moment, Night Spirit extended its claws and landed gently on the green armored crocodile's tongue. It did not use much strength, but the green armored crocodile's tongue was already bleeding. "Now, listen to me." Standing in the mouth of the green armored crocodile, Su Zimo said slowly, "Right now, follow the Jishui River and head downstream. I'll borrow your stomach for the time being. I'll naturally leave once my injuries are healed. Furthermore, I promise you that I won't harm your life." The green armored crocodile had already cultivated to the level of a spirit demon and had long gained sentience. Su Zimo believed that the green armored crocodile would definitely be able to understand his words. Indeed, after a slight hesitation, the green armored crocodile nodded. That was a good choice. It could either trust Su Zimo, or it could die right now. Hugging Night Spirit, Su Zimo slid down the green armored crocodile's throat all the way to its stomach. At the same time, Su Zimo crushed the defensive talisman that Leng Ro gave him. A barrier of light surrounded Su Zimo. Although there was a slight stench in the stomach of the green armored crocodile, it was a perfect hiding place where no one would disturb him and he could calm down and recuperate. If Su Zimo was the one carrying Night Spirit through the Jishui River, Su Zimo would not have time to recuperate at all. This arrangement could be considered as killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Su Zimo intended to stay in the stomach of the green armored crocodile for the time being. He would leave this place and return to the shore after his and Night Spirit's injuries were healed. The green armored crocodile wagged its tail and swam down the river, vanishing from the spot. 3 days later, a large number of blood-eyed crows circled the skies above the Jishui River, covering the skies in a dense pack. Peng Yu and the other cultivators who participated in the Battle of Dongling Valley stood on the shore, looking at the gushing river in silence with terrible expressions. Before they set off, there were 10 perfected Jin Dan. But now, there were only 6 left. Peng Yu's face was yellow and he seemed to be seriously injured. He had rushed here before he could recuperate. The number of Foundation establishment cultivators was also reduced by half. Caw, caw. Before long, an ear-piercing cry sounded from the distant horizon. The blood-eyed crows paused for a moment before splitting into 2 sides in the skies, as though they were welcoming some powerful existence. Not long after, a huge, pitch-black blood crow king galloped over. On its back was a middle-aged man in blood-colored robes. His hands were behind his back, his face was thin and his gaze was dark. "Greetings, Palace Lord." Everyone from Blood Crow Palace knelt on the ground hurriedly and lowered their heads. Trembling, they did not dare to meet the Palace Lord's gaze. Gritting his teeth, Peng Yu mustered his courage and said, "Palace Lord, Peng Yu recounted everything that happened in Dongling Valley in detail. However, in reality, no one saw how Yu Fei died. That was also the greatest mystery of the entire incident. If Yu Fei did not die, the Blood Crow young lord would not have died with the protection of the Jin Dan realm spirit demon." Chapter 228. You mean to say that the combined forces of 4 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators and Jin Dan realm spirit demons died in the hands of a mid-stage Foundation establishment cultivator, The Palace Lord looked at Peng Yu with ghastly green eyes. Although his tone was calm, there was an inexplicable coldness to it. There were so many people and it was supposed to be a massacre without any suspense. None of the people from Dongling Valley should have escaped. But what happened in the end, Peng Yu and the others lowered their heads in the face of the Palace Lord's questioning. None of them dared to reply. The air seemed to have frozen, adding a murderous aura to it. Blood Crow Palace's Palace Lord exuded an extremely terrifying aura that could not be resisted. At that moment, all the cultivators who were kneeling before the Palace Lord felt extremely insignificant, as though they were facing a god of the universe. I can understand if perfected Jin Dan was the one who tried his best to escape. However, how did a mere Foundation establishment cultivator manage to escape from the encirclement of so many people? I just want to know how a Foundation establishment cultivator managed to escape. The Palace Lord's voice turned sharp and sharp. Many cultivators revealed pained expressions but none of them dared to make a sound. What trash! The Palace Lord's expression was cold and his glabella shone with a sinister glint. His eyes were filled with killing intent as he slowly extended his palm and pressed down in the direction of Peng Yu and the others. Suddenly, as though it was under immense pressure, the raging river came to a strange standstill. Poof! There was a crisp sound. Right in front of everyone, Peng Yu's body exploded into a blood mist and he died on the spot without a corpse left. When they saw that, everyone kneeling behind Peng Yu was completely stunned. They felt as though their hearts were gripped by someone and they even forgot to breathe. Peng Yu, who had cultivated the Jin Dan phenomenon, did not even have a chance to explain himself before he was killed just like that. The Blood Crow Palace's Lord's gaze swept across everyone. Whichever person his gaze landed on, their faces would turn paler, as though they could smell death. I'll give you a chance to make up for your mistakes. Find Su Zimo for me. If he's alive, I want to see him. If he's dead, I want to see his corpse. The moment the Blood Crow Palace's Lord said that, everyone felt their hearts lighten as though they were relieved of a heavy burden, as though they had just taken a trip through the gates of hell. Soon, the crowd dispersed. Some dived into the Jishui River, while others followed the river bank to search for clues. Ga. The Blood Crow King suddenly raised his head and screeched twice. The numerous blood-eyed crows circling in the sky seemed to have received some sort of order, and they all scattered. The Blood Crow King walked forward and said in a deep voice, "Master, I got them to search along the Jishui River. It's just that Jishui River is really too long. I really don't know where this Su Zimo will come ashore. Don't worry, I have my ways." The Blood Crow Palace Lord said with an indifferent expression. The Blood Crow King seemed to have thought of something as his eyes lit up. He nodded and said, "That's right. The young lord had used the blood slave spell on this person. Although the young lord was dead, the power of the spell must still remain in this person's body. As long as you use your secret skill to search, you'll definitely be able to locate this lad. Yes, there's something about this Jishui River that can isolate my secret skill from searching." A vicious glint flashed through the Blood Crow Palace Lord's eyes as he said coldly, "However, as long as this lad leaves Jishui River, I'll definitely know." At that moment, Su Zimo did not know that he had accidentally dodged a huge calamity by sneaking into Jishui River in order to avoid the blood-eyed crow's pursuit. After entering the green-armored crocodile's stomach, Su Zimo's consciousness was already close to blurry. The damage to his body from releasing blood escape twice in a row was way too great. Su Zimo tried his best to maintain his consciousness and opened the blood-robed youth's storage bag. Without even looking, he poured out everything inside. Su Zimo found a few bottles of healing elixirs and swallowed them. Keeping the rest of the items, he began to recuperate. Prior to this, Su Zimo had consumed a demon beast's inner core and a massive amount of essence energy was sealed within his body. With the help of the demon beast's inner core and elixirs, Su Zimo began to cultivate before long. Huff! Huff! Growling. Tiger leopard thunder sounded. Essence energy regenerated endlessly in his organs and his bones crackled. Blood was constantly regenerated like a trickle, causing Su Zimo's body to regain its vitality. Time passed by rapidly. After a long time, Su Zimo's body finally recovered and his injuries were completely healed. Splash! Splash! Boom! Boom! The bloodline in Su Zimo's body surged like a tidal wave. Within the surging bloodline, endless lightning flashed and mixed with a deep rumble of thunder, causing one's heart to shudder. The stomach of the green-armored crocodile was filled with extremely rich demonic chi that was almost corporeal. All of that demonic chi was produced after Su Zimo's cultivation. The green-armored crocodile was shocked to discover that its physique had improved under the tempering of the demonic chi as well. To think that this is a demon beast that has formed a core. I've misjudged. The green-armored crocodile took Su Zimo as a demon beast that had cultivated an inner core and was merely in human form right now. After an unknown period of time, Su Zimo's eyes opened like a meteor streaking through the night, shining brightly with a divine light. Su Zimo's clothes fluttered and a tiny head popped out, blinking its bright, pitch-black eyes that were filled with spirituality. The man and beast exchanged glances and Su Zimo smiled. Surviving a calamity was always a joyous thing. After refining the demon beast's inner core, Su Zimo made some progress in the organs refinement section as well. Although there was still a long way to go before he reached greater mastery of the organs refinement section, it was already rather difficult. I wonder if Little Fatty, Leng Ro and the others managed to escape. I wonder how Peak Master Wen Xian and Elder Yu are doing right now. At the thought of everyone from Misty Peak, Su Zimo sighed internally. As of now, he did not know the background of the faction that attacked them in Dongling Valley. However, it was clear that the other party came prepared. On the one hand, the other party was seeking revenge in the Battle of Dongling Valley. After all, Su Zimo was the one who killed all the cultivators of that faction outside Linfeng City. However, the greatest possibility was that the other party was doing it for the sect competition. The sect competition would determine the spirit, elixir, talisman and weapon ranking lists. Only those who were ranked in each of the top 10 would be qualified to enter the ancient battlefield. Although the ancient battlefield was extremely dangerous, it was way too important for every Foundation establishment cultivator. Danger meant opportunity. In every sect competition, Ethereal Peak occupied the most spots on the spirit ranking and would definitely occupy 3 of them. Now that the 3 legacy disciples of Misty Peak were gathered, what would it mean if the blood-robed youth took all 3 of them in as blood slaves under his control? It would mean that the blood-robed youth would be able to take up at least 3 spots in the sect competition. Given the blood-robed youth's strength as a 4 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator, he could even take up 1 spot. That was 4 spots. If the blood-robed youth enslaved a few more powerful Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators, there was a high chance that all the spots on the spirit ranking would belong to him. In reality, that was the intention of the Blood Crow Palace's lord as well. It was all for the sake of ensuring the safety of the Blood Crow young master as much as possible in the ancient battlefield. However, it was a pity that everything was for naught. The Blood Crow young master did not die in the ancient battlefield but outside. Chapter 229. After recovering from his injuries, Su Zimo did not linger in the stomach of the green-armored crocodile for too long. Ascending the riverbank, Su Zimo rode on his sword and patrolled the surroundings before taking out a map to compare. As he had expected, he was getting further and further away from Misty Peak. Given his current location, it would take him a month to return to Misty Peak even if he sped without rest. Right then, Su Zimo frowned. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his mind without any warning. Right after, Su Zimo's vision blurred, as though he saw the blood-robed youth who was already dead standing before him with a strange expression and a sinister smile. A strange green color appeared in Su Zimo's eyes and paused for a moment before disappearing. Su Zimo narrowed his eyes with a terrible expression. Although the blood-robed youth was already dead, there was still the remnant power of the blood-slave art in his body. Furthermore, he did not notice it when he was recovering from his injuries earlier on. The cultivators of that mysterious faction knew some extremely strange methods that were unpredictable and impossible to guard against. Just now, was this strange pain a coincidence or was someone manipulating it from behind the scenes? Su Zimo's gaze flickered and he fell into deep thought. He was more inclined to believe that someone was behind this. After all, he had never felt such a sharp pain when he was in the stomach of the green-armored crocodile. However, it appeared not long after he left Jishui River. That was too much of a coincidence. Furthermore, if someone was manipulating it from behind the scenes, what was that person's motive? Are they trying to determine whether I'm dead or alive, or are they trying to track me down? After pondering for a moment, Su Zimo let out a long breath and murmured, "They're truly persistent." If his guess was correct, it meant that he might be able to avoid the other party's detection in Jishui River. However, Su Zimo could not stay in Jishui River forever. He had to think of a way to deal with it. If he wanted to take drastic measures, there were only two ways. The first was to think of a way to get rid of the remnant power in his body. The second was to think of a way to get rid of his pursuers. Neither of those two paths was realistic and Su Zimo could not do it with his own strength. Su Zimo had no clue about the first path. Su Zimo had a vague idea about the second path. Of course, the second path was way too dangerous and there was a high chance that he would die. Su Zimo opened the map again and searched for his next destination. There were some dangerous places marked on the map. Some of them were labeled with danger, some were vague. Among them, there was a small blood-red fork drawn on one of the spots. The color was extremely heavy. That proved, that was the most place. Su Zimo knew very little about this place and only knew that it was a ruin. A ruin from the primordial era. The primordial era was too far away from the present, so there weren't many things left behind. However, there must be something special about the fact that the primordial ruin could be preserved to this day. A vicious glint flashed through Su Zimo's eyes as he put away the map and sped in the direction of the primordial ruin. Let's see what dangers there are in the primordial ruin and if they can kill you guys. Su Zimo intended to lure his pursuers to the primordial ruin. At that moment, it was almost evening. Su Zimo did not rest and sprinted. He did not know who the cultivators chasing after him were or what their cultivation realms were. However, the earlier he arrived at the primordial ruin, the higher his chances of killing everyone behind him. Morning. Su Zimo was travel-worn and finally arrived at the periphery of the primordial ruin. When he arrived, Su Zimo was shocked to discover that there were many cultivators around. There were Qi condensation and foundation establishment cultivators and even some Jin Dan perfected ones standing in the air. At a single glance, there were tens of thousands of cultivators gathered here. It was a shocking sight. There were even a few cultivators among them. There was a high chance that they were Jining Jinjuan. At the nascent soul realm, one could no longer tell their cultivation realms with the spirit-peering art. Su Zimo merely felt that the auras of those people were terrifying and were even stronger than perfected Jin Dan perfected ones. Something's not right, Su Zimo was confused. Initially, he thought that those people were specially waiting for him here because they were recruited by the mysterious faction. If that was the case, the methods of the mysterious faction were truly unpredictable. However, after observing for a while, Su Zimo discovered that those people were clearly not from the same sect. Instead, they came from all over the world. Su Zimo was even more confused. Although he had yet to truly step foot into the primordial ruin, what was the point of gathering so many cultivators here? Of course, in order to hide his identity, Su Zimo had already placed his sect's identity badge into his storage bag. Fellow Daoist, what are all of you gathered here for? Su Zimo asked a random itinerant cultivator at the Qi condensation realm. When the itinerant cultivator saw that Su Zimo was a Foundation establishment cultivator, he revealed a respectful expression. That person cupped his fists. Fellow Daoist, you don't know. A month ago, in the primordial ruin ahead, there was a golden beam of light that shot into the skies. It lasted for a long time and even attracted lightning and thunder. Before Su Zimo could say anything, another itinerant cultivator who was passing by could not help but interject. I heard that it was a rainbow glow and was extremely extraordinary. I heard that there were even dragon roars and phoenix cries. TSK, I even saw a true dragon. Although it was just a scale and a claw, it was shocking enough. Each of its scales is bigger than our bodies, and its claws are longer and sharper than our flying swords. More cultivators from the side came over and commented as though they were telling the truth. Spittle flew everywhere and their eyes shone brightly. It was clear that they were bragging and were getting more and more mysterious. Su Zimo did not really understand and asked again, So, this proves that there are definitely treasures in the primordial ruin ahead. Furthermore, the treasure has just been born. There's also another possibility. The restrictions of a cave abode of a powerful existence in the primordial ruin have disappeared and there are too many treasures within, causing a change in the world. Yes, it might be a legacy left behind by a sect from the primordial era that's waiting for me to inherit. The surrounding cultivators chimed in with their own guesses. But I heard that the primordial ruin is a place of great danger. Su Zimo added. Yes. Someone nodded. That's a rumor. However, very few people know what dangers lie within. Since ancient times, cultivators have died here almost every year. Of course, it's dangerous. However, it's a primordial ruin after all and there are many things left behind from the primordial era. If you manage to pick up a treasure, you might be able to soar. At that point, many cultivators' eyes shone with excitement. If something left behind from the primordial era was still intact, it would definitely be a treasure. Chapter 230. For the past month, cultivators rushed over endlessly from outside the primordial ruin upon hearing the news. On one hand, it was because there seemed to be an ancient treasure within the ruin. On the other hand, the primordial ruin was way too attractive for many cultivators. The ancient battlefield was a secret ground left behind from the ancient era and formed its own dimension. Even the ancient battlefield attracted many cultivators, let alone a mysterious place left behind from the primordial era. Many cultivators managed to encounter heaven-defying opportunities in the ancient battlefield and soared into the skies. What would happen if one managed to obtain an opportunity in the primordial ruin? If a cultivator were to obtain it, they might be able to dominate the world. If a sect were to obtain it, they might become the strongest sect in the Great Zhou dynasty. In fact, they might even become the strongest sect in the entire north region of Tianhuang mainland and might even be on par with the immortal sects. Among the tens of thousands of cultivators, most of them were itinerant cultivators and some were from sections. Among them, Heaven Azura sect and Purple Cloud sect were the strongest. In the Great Zhou dynasty, those two sects were second only to the 5 major sects and Su Zimo had heard of them as well. The few Jinying Jinjuan were from those two sects. Roar! Suddenly, a roar sounded from not far away. A golden lion with a terrifying aura sped over. It was massive and had a frightening aura. Its eyes were widened with a cold glint. It was clear that the golden lion was a spirit demon that had cultivated an inner core and was extraordinarily handsome. Many cultivators were startled and quickly scattered. The golden lion stepped through the air and arrived beside a Jining Jinjuan, lowering its head and body obediently. Yes, the Jining Jinjuan nodded and leaped onto it. Ta! 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 The sound of hurried hooves could be heard. A pure white horse with a single horn on its head galloped over from the distant skies. It snorted continuously and arrived beside another Jining Jinjuan at an extremely fast speed. Before long, the beasts of the few Jining Jinjuan present had arrived. Those beasts had terrifying auras and were all spirit demons that had cultivated an inner core. However, when these exotic beasts looked at the ancient ruins in the distance, their eyes faintly revealed a hint of fear. Let's go, let's go. Among them, a Jining Jinjuan of Heaven Azura sect ordered and led his disciples towards the primordial ruin. Immediately after, Jining Jinjuan of Purple Cloud sect led his disciples and followed. The primordial ruin is so dangerous. Should we observe it? If we stay here and watch, I'm worried that someone will beat us to it if there really is an ancient treasure. Let's follow them then. This is our last chance. If we follow the group of nascent souls, we'll have a chance to survive even if we can't obtain the ancient treasure. The remaining cultivators discussed among themselves and quickly divided into two camps. Most of the cultivators chose to follow the Tian Luo sect and Purple Cloud sect to the ancient ruins. Only a small portion of the cultivators with hesitant expressions on the spot. Initially, Su Zimo did not intend to enter so early. However, he had just realized that traces of blood-eyed crows had already appeared in the skies. Furthermore, their numbers were increasing gradually. This meant that the blood-eyed crows that were closest to this place had already caught up. It wouldn't be long before the people who were chasing after him arrived here. I can't delay any longer. A vicious glint flashed through Su Zimo's eyes. If he was blocked outside the primordial ruin, he would have nowhere to run. Su Zimo blended into the crowd and headed towards the primordial ruin. There was a dense forest outside the primordial ruin and it was dark within. The closer they got to the primordial ruin, the denser the trees around them were, emitting an ancient aura. Every single ancient tree was extremely thick and needed more than 10 people to wrap their arms around it. They rose from the ground and towered into the clouds. A cool breeze blew gently, and the fragmented sunlight shone through the dense and lush leaves, bringing some warmth to everyone. Although the group of cultivators was huge with tens of thousands of them and looked rather imposing, they seemed insignificant in this primordial forest. Unknowingly, Night Spirit had popped out. Sprawled on Su Zimo's chest, it stuck its head out and surveyed the area with a pair of pitch-black eyes with a cold expression. Even the beasts that Jining Jinjuan sat on, such as the golden lion and unicorn that had cultivated inner cores, were trembling in fear in this primordial forest. However, there was no trace of fear on Night Spirit's face. All of a sudden, a tragic cry sounded from the front. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat as he stopped in his tracks and looked over. Not far ahead, a gigantic anaconda was coiled on the branches of an ancient tree and its body was almost fused with the tree. If not for the fact that there were a few people in its mouth and blood was spewing out, Su Zimo would not have been able to detect it with his eyesight. The anaconda was way too huge. More than half of its body was hidden in the leaves. However, just the part that was exposed was more than 100 feet long. Those few cultivators were not even enough to fill the gaps between its teeth. The most terrifying thing was that even perfected being Jean Dan could not resist at all and was crushed in a single bite before being devoured. Boom! A nascent soul cultivator attacked brazenly. His sleeves trembled and an extremely terrifying power burst forth, smashing heavily onto the anaconda's body. The anaconda's body slanted from the impact and a few of its scales slid off, revealing its flesh. However, not only did the anaconda not retreat, it was even more ferocious as its eyes shone with a cold and cruel glint. Pust! The anaconda opened its mouth and inhaled fiercely, as though it wanted to devour the entire world. A violent wind howled. The gigantic air current was almost corporeal, like a saber or sword. It surged over, and even the branches on the ancient tree were severed by the evil wind as leaves rustled down. There was no way the weaker cultivators could control their bodies and were sucked into the anaconda's mouth instantly. This was the true anaconda eclipse. Even though Su Zimo had cultivated this move as well, he was still extremely shocked when he saw it now. "Beast, you must have a death wish." Another nascent soul cultivator attacked and hollered, shooting out 3 flying swords. The 3 flying swords were surging with an extremely powerful force that far exceeded the scope of a spirit art. When the 3 flying swords were about to enter the anaconda's mouth, the nascent soul cultivator who attacked seemed to have sensed something, and his expression changed starkly. "Not good, hurry and retreat." That person exclaimed and waved his sleeves, sweeping up the 3 flying swords that were shot out and fleeing into the distance immediately. Su Zimo's eyelids twitched. There were 2 fist-sized bumps on the anaconda's head that were protruding, resembling a pair of horns. "That's not an anaconda, it's a WIRM. If it was an anaconda, it could only be considered as a remnant demon beast. However, if it cultivated into a WIRM, it would be equivalent to a pure-blooded ferocious beast." The few nascent soul cultivators in the group sped into the distance immediately. The army of cultivators behind them did not dare to linger and followed hurriedly. The crowd was in a mess and fled with all their might. Bang! The tail of the WIRM suddenly fell and smashed into the crowd, causing a blood mist to appear in the air. It was way too tragic. Hundreds of cultivators died in the blink of an eye. Be it chi condensation, foundation establishment, or perfected Jin Dan, they were like ants against the WIRM and could not withstand a single blow. At that moment, everyone had yet to step foot into the primordial ruin. This meant that the massacre had only just begun. Chapter 231. The primordial forest before him was 100 times more dangerous than Sung Lang mountain range. Any random demon beast that popped out was a pure-blooded ferocious beast. Even Jinying Jinjuan was scared away and did not dare to take it head-on. Su Zimo took advantage of the chaos to escape. Lowering his body, he used his limbs to slither through the dense forest like an anaconda with agile movement techniques. In such an environment, Su Zimo's chances of survival were much higher than cultivators of the same level. That was because, to a certain extent, Su Zimo was a demon. He knew the habits and methods of most demon beasts and the rules of survival in the forest. Initially, Su Zimo was worried that Night Spirit would run around. Although Night Spirit could kill a Jin Dan realm spirit demon in Dongling Valley, Night Spirit was still a demon beast. However, Su Zimo knew very well that Night Spirit's strength was far inferior to a Jin Dan realm spirit demon. To Su Zimo's surprise, although Night Spirit was not afraid, it was extremely obedient and stayed in his embrace obediently. It merely stuck its head out and surveyed the surroundings vigilantly. Before long, Su Zimo finally escaped from the WIRM's attack range. Before he could catch his breath, Su Zimo's expression changed. He suddenly sensed an even greater danger approaching rapidly. "Not good, I've got to leave this place as soon as possible." His survival experience in Sung Lang mountain range told him that the blood stench of the battle behind him would attract even stronger demon beasts. The strength of those demon beasts would not be weaker than the WIRM, and they should be pure-blooded ferocious beasts as well. If he was trapped here by those pure-blooded ferocious beasts, he would definitely die. At that moment, Su Zimo finally understood that Heaven Azura sect and Purple Clouds sect did not have the motive of chasing away those itinerant cultivators. The main objective of the two sects was to make use of the flesh of those itinerant cultivators to attract the ferocious beasts in the forest so that they could take the opportunity to escape. When those itinerant cultivators made use of the two major sects, they were actually being made use of by the two major sects as well. Due to the flood dragon blocking the way, the tens of thousands of cultivators were quickly divided into two camps. Among them, most of the cultivators were intercepted by the ferocious flood dragon, while a few nascent soul cultivators of the Tian Luo sect and the Purple Cloud sect led their disciples towards the ancient ruins. Behind the cultivators from the two sects, there were also some rogue cultivators, including Su Zimo. Most of the cultivators who could break through the flood dragon's blockade had some tricks up their sleeves. Su Zimo glanced at it. Among these rogue cultivators, there was indeed a cultivator that Su Zimo had some impression of. This person was dressed in a grey Taoist robe and held a folding fan in his hand. He looked to be in his 30s, with a pale face and a slightly plump figure. His appearance was ordinary, but his eyes were extremely spirited. When they were outside, Su Zimo had a few words with this person. This person liked to talk nonsense, and even said it as if it was true. Previously, the rumor about dragons roaring and tigers roaring in the ancient ruins, and seeing a true dragon whose scales were bigger than a human's, came from this person. Who would believe these meaningless words? Su Zimo had checked the cultivation of this person and found that he was only at early-stage foundation establishment. You've got some skills, Su Zimo nodded to himself. To be fair, the reason why Su Zimo could keep up was because of his demonic cultivation methods. However, it was truly not easy for this grey-robed cultivator to be able to make it this far with the strength of an early-stage foundation establishment. As though he sensed something, the grey-robed cultivator turned back and glanced at Su Zimo, smiling with a friendly attitude. Right then, a commotion broke out ahead once more. A gigantic tiger darted out of the forest. It was dozens of feet tall and had a ferocious expression, lunging towards the crowd immediately. What was even more frightening was that the tiger had 9 tails. 9 tails, tiger form. Su Zimo recalled for a moment and said slowly with a grim expression, pure-blooded ferocious beast, Lu Wu. At the same time, the grey-robed young man frowned and murmured, it's a Lu Wu. The Lu Wu was one of the ancient ferocious beasts. It had 9 tails and was shaped like a tiger with terrifying strength. The moment the Lu Wu charged into the crowd, the golden lion roared, wanting to push it back or even kill it. However, the Lu Wu danced with its 9 tails and lunged forward. In a single round, it bit off the golden lion's neck and fresh blood gushed out. A blood mist spread through the forest. The owner of the golden lion, a Jining Jinjuan, fled into the distance without hesitation. Many cultivators had already lost their order and were panicking as they fled in all directions. However, the forest was not as simple as they thought. Furthermore, this was a primordial forest. It was easy to enter but difficult to get out. Swoosh! A centipede that was more than 10 meters long and as thick as a water bucket crawled out of the forest. Its entire body was blood red and its 1,000 legs moved continuously with a menacing gaze. The blood-colored centipede killed its way into the crowd and split the formation into 2 once more. Powerful demon beasts appeared continuously in the forest and most of them were pure-blooded ferocious beasts. There was no way Su Zimo could fight against them and could only make use of the chaos to escape. In a forest as such, even Jining Jinjuan was useless. They had to escape the moment they saw pure-blooded ferocious beasts. Su Zimo could not imagine what sort of terrifying existences he would encounter if he truly entered the primordial ruin. It was way too tragic. There were more than 30,000 cultivators who entered the primordial forest. Now, there were only a few thousand left and the rest were almost buried in the forest. If they could truly make it out of the forest, how many of the remaining few thousand would survive? 100 kilometers away from the primordial ruin, a gigantic pitch-black crow flapped its wings and sped over at lightning speed. A middle-aged man in blood robes sat on the back of the pitch-black crow. They were the Blood Crow King and Blood Crow Palace's lord. The Blood Crow Palace's lord had just executed a tracking secret skill when he gradually frowned and his gaze flickered. Master, what's wrong? Could Su Zimo have hidden in Jishui River again? The Blood Crow King asked. No, the Blood Crow Palace's lord's expression darkened and he grit his teeth. That lad is about to enter that region. Ah! The Blood Crow King did not understand and was stunned for a moment. A moment later, he was enlightened and a look of fear flashed through his eyes as he asked tentatively, "That region?" "Yes," the Blood Crow Palace's lord nodded. The Blood Crow King analyzed, "That lad's goal should be to lure you there. You must not fall for it, master." Pausing for a moment, he continued, "Furthermore, what sort of place is that? Even Jinying Jinjuan, a void reversion, might not be able to escape unscathed. If a mere foundation establishment cultivator like him goes, he'll definitely die." "That lad is scheming," the Blood Crow Palace's lord said with a dark expression. "This is an open scheme. Even if I know his intentions, I have to go. Even if he dies, I have to witness it with my own eyes. Master, be careful. Don't be rash, it's fine. This open scheme can be said to be rather brilliant. It's a pity that the lad missed something." The Blood Crow Palace's lord waved it off and sneered, "He doesn't know my identity nor does he know what's in that region. Even if those existences are alerted, given my identity, it shouldn't be an issue for me to escape unscathed. Let's go. I want to see where else this Su Zimo can escape to." Chapter 232. The primordial forest was filled with a pungent stench of blood. A blood mist floated and hung on the branches and leaves, condensing into blood droplets that slid down silently. Amidst the brambles, on the gravel and between the branches, broken corpses were strewn one after another. Their deaths were tragic, they were either torn into two or crushed into meat paste, completely unrecognizable. This forest had already turned into a Shura purgatory. It was filled with blood and brutality as the roars of ferocious beasts echoed one after another. The ancient trees swayed and the ground quaked. Su Zimo believed that someone would have already regretted it the moment the massacre started. However, it was already too late for them to leave this primordial forest by then. The ferocious beasts in this forest had already cut off their escape route completely. There were fewer and fewer people left. Su Zimo witnessed with his own eyes that the nascent soul cultivator at the front was dragged away by a seemingly harmless flower. There was a tragic cry before silence. Even the most ordinary vegetation in the forest was left behind from the primordial era and was extremely terrifying. The pressure increased. Even nascent souls could not guarantee that they could escape this forest. Even if Su Zimo was familiar with the laws of the jungle, it would be difficult for him to leave this place alive. Right then, Su Zimo glanced over and discovered that the gray-robed cultivator not far away had suddenly changed directions. He was no longer following behind Heaven Azura sect and Purple Cloud sect, burrowing into another patch of bushes. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat as he pondered. Right now, even though Heaven Azura sect and Purple Cloud sect had nascent souls paving the way and were strong, they were huge targets and were the number one targets of the primordial beasts. If they took another path at this moment, it would be relatively safer. Of course, that was only relative. In this primordial forest, every step was filled with killing intent. Danger could be seen everywhere. There was no safe place. Su Zimo's gaze flickered and he changed directions as well, following the gray-robed cultivator's path. Like an anaconda, Su Zimo slithered through the bushes and caught up to the gray-robed cultivator before long, trailing far behind. The gray-robed cultivator's speed was not fast and he would even stop occasionally. Additionally, the gray-robed cultivator's actions were rather strange. His right hand was holding the folding fan while his left hand was spread open. His thumb was constantly touching his other fingers at an extremely fast speed, as though he was trying to deduce something. What confused Su Zimo the most was that even though more than half of the tens of thousands of cultivators had died in the woods, there was no sign of fear on the man's face. Such a temperament was too terrifying. Right then, the gray-robed cultivator stopped in his tracks and hid once more. Seeing this scene, Su Zimo did not act rashly. His entire body was pressed against the ground as he held his breath and concentrated. A moment later, Su Zimo was alarmed. Immediately after, a large shadow swept over their heads, covering the sky and the sun, exuding a terrifying and ferocious aura. It flew towards the direction of the Tianluo sect and the Ziyun sect at an extremely fast speed. Su Zimo's face paled, and he broke out in a cold sweat. Even though Su Zimo could sense danger in this primordial forest with his spiritual perception, he was still able to sense danger ahead of time. However, it would be too late by then. The gray-robed cultivator stood up and continued sprinting forward. This person has some tricks up his sleeves. If we follow behind him, we might really be able to get out of this forest. Su Zimo followed closely behind. Indeed, Su Zimo followed behind the man and stopped along the way, avoiding the attacks of ferocious beasts multiple times. In Su Zimo's eyes, the gray-robed cultivator instantly became unfathomable. Before long, the gray-robed cultivator ahead seemed to have sensed something and suddenly turned around. Su Zimo crouched down hurriedly and hid. The gray-robed cultivator swept his gaze and paused for a moment at the spot where Su Zimo was hiding. Smiling meaningfully, he turned around and continued forward. This time round, the gray-robed cultivator took left and right steps in a strange manner. Burrowing into the forest, he disappeared from Su Zimo's sight. Su Zimo followed hurriedly but realized that he had completely lost track of the gray-robed cultivator. Su Zimo realized that his tracks had been exposed and the gray-robed cultivator had sensed it. That was why the gray-robed cultivator chose to shake him off. Fufu. Su Zimo smiled faintly and checked on the spot carefully before choosing a direction to chase in. Traversing through such a forest would definitely leave behind traces. Others might not be able to see it. However, given Su Zimo's experience in surviving in the forest, he could find clues and determine the direction the gray-robed cultivator left in. Of course, that would mean that Su Zimo's speed would be much slower. A moment later, Su Zimo looked over and could not help but heave a sigh of relief. Not far ahead was the edge of the primordial forest. All of a sudden, Su Zimo's expression changed starkly. Without hesitation, he shifted horizontally from the spot. Clang! A deafening sound came from behind. Turning back, Su Zimo could not help but gasp and feel chills run down his spine. A gigantic ferocious beast with 8 legs and burning with flames stood in front of Su Zimo with a menacing expression. It was an ancient ferocious beast, the blue flame spider. Although the blue flame spider did not know how to spit silk, its 8 sharp claws were more terrifying than any divine weapon. Just now, the blue flame spider's claws descended like a gigantic guillotine filled with spikes, carving out a ravine on the ground. If Su Zimo was half a step slower, he would have been sliced into 2. Given Su Zimo's cultivation realm, he would be burned to ashes the moment he came into contact with the flames on the blue flame spider's body. Su Zimo did not dare to linger and turned to flee. Clang! 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 The blue flame spider chased after him relentlessly at an extremely fast speed and sparks flew as its claws sliced through the rocks. Rumble! Boom! Suddenly, a deafening sound came from behind Su Zimo. Not far behind him, a gigantic pitch-black cave appeared beneath the blue flame spider. It was dark and deep within, emitting a chilling killing intent. A hint of panic flashed through the eyes of the blue flame spider, as though it wanted to escape. Boom! Suddenly, a huge pitch-black fleshy tentacle emerged from the crypt. It was like a giant python and it coiled around the body of the pale flame spider. Screech! Screech! The blue flame spider let out a series of ear-piercing cries and struggled continuously. However, it was to no avail and it was dragged into the cave in the blink of an eye, vanishing. Su Zimo gulped. He did not manage to see what was in the cave at all. Swoosh! Swoosh! A commotion sounded from the forest not far away. The footsteps of ferocious beasts could be heard with killing intent. Suddenly, Su Zimo released his power of blood chi and demonic chi filled his body. He executed divine steed fleeting and sprinted forward with all his might. The silver-winged cicada, bloodthirsty centipede, wind-riding eagle and many other pure-blooded ancient ferocious beasts charged over with murderous intent. Su Zimo grit his teeth and persevered with a resolute gaze. 50 feet, 30 feet, 10 feet. Swoosh! His vision cleared up. Su Zimo had finally charged out of the primordial forest. As for the many ancient ferocious beasts that chased to the edge of the forest came to a tacit understanding and stopped in their tracks. Their eyes were filled with fear as they retreated slowly. Chapter 233. There were tens of thousands of cultivators that entered the forest behind him. However, Su Zimo believed that less than 1% of them would be able to make it out of the forest alive. As one of them, Su Zimo should be happy. However, looking at the many ferocious beasts that were retreating into the forest, Su Zimo suddenly realized that the moment he charged out of the forest, it also meant that he had stepped onto the land left behind from the primordial era. The primordial ruin. It was marked as the location of the most fearsome place on the map. The primordial ruin that even so many ferocious pure-blooded ferocious beasts were wary of. What sort of ancient secrets were hidden in this region? Su Zimo turned around slowly and looked over. That single glance caused Su Zimo's pupils to constrict and his heart to stop beating. There were endless piles of bones. At a glance, there was no end to them and they covered the entire land. Many of the skeletons belonged to humans but there were also remnants of ferocious beasts. Almost none of them were intact and they were all shattered and scattered on the ground. This was a true sea of bones. Standing in front of this sea of bones, Su Zimo seemed incomparably tiny. It was as though he would be devoured by the sea of bones the moment he entered and nothing would be left. There was an inexplicable fear, an indescribable suffocation, an omnipresent oppression and a faint stench of blood. Right then, Su Zimo's chest moved and Night Spirit suddenly burrowed out, leaping down. Looking at the sea of bones before him, Night Spirit's nose twitched. His expression was grim and his eyes shone with a mysterious glint. All of a sudden. At the edge of the primordial forest not far away, two figures were the first to run out. They were covered in blood and looked wretched. It's them. Su Zimo swept his gaze and recognized the two of them. They were Jining Jinjuan from Heaven Azura sect and Purple Clouds sect respectively. The two of them looked at the forest behind them with lingering fear. When they turned back to look at the sea of bones before them, they were stunned on the spot and could not conceal the shock in their eyes. Even Jining Jinjuan would feel incomparably tiny in the face of this sea of bones. How tragic of a battle was it for such a terrifying ruin to be formed? Run! It's right in front. Quick, quick! Save me! A cry of surprise came from the forest not far away. Not long after, another group of cultivators rushed out of the forest. There were more than 100 of them. Their hair was disheveled and their clothes were ragged. They fell to the ground and panted heavily. Among these people were Taoist Master Jean Dan and Foundation Establishment cultivators. Including Jining Jinjuan and Reverend Jean Dan, there were only a little more than 100 cultivators left in the army of tens of thousands of cultivators. The others did not even have the chance to see the primordial ruins. All of them died in the forest. Su Zimo glanced in that direction and retracted his gaze. He didn't want to attract the attention of those cultivators. Suddenly, the Night Spirit whimpered. She opened her mouth and gently bit Su Zimo's clothes, pulling them towards the sea of bones. You want to go in? Su Zimo frowned and asked in a low voice. The Night Spirit nodded. This sea of bones is not simple. I don't know what dangers lie ahead. Let's wait for those people to scout first. We're not in a hurry, Su Zimo said. The Night Spirit shook her head. Suddenly, she raised a hind leg and peed on Su Zimo. Naturally, Su Zimo could dodge it easily. However, on second thought, the night spirit had already gained sentience and was extremely intelligent. There must be a reason why she chose to do that. What sect are you from? What's your name? Right then, two Jining Jinjuan strode over and looked down at Su Zimo. Their tone was cold and unquestionable. I'm Su Zimo. I don't belong to any sect. Su Zimo replied calmly with a half-truth. That's great. Go take a look at the Sea of Bones. If you can return alive, you can choose from Heaven Azura sect or Purple Cloud sect. We'll let you join either of them, one of the Jining Jinjuan said. That's right. The other Jining Jinjuan nodded as well. Su Zimo, this is a great opportunity for you. Su Zimo sneered internally and did not reply. No matter what, he had to leave this Sea of Bones. The difference was whether he should leave now or wait for his pursuers to catch up. Given the current situation, if he didn't enter the Sea of Bones, the two Jining Jinjuan beside him would most likely kill him right here. Furthermore, the night spirit was still persevering. She looked at Su Zimo expectantly, eager to enter the Sea of Bones. At that thought, Su Zimo did not hesitate and strode towards the Sea of Bones. Night Spirit followed beside Su Zimo's feet like a half-grown black puppy with a hint of excitement in the depths of her eyes. The moment Su Zimo stepped into the Sea of Bones, he felt something amiss. The spirit energy in his dantian seemed to be restrained by an invisible force and could not be mobilized. It was similar to the effect of the spirit lock formation, but it was much more terrifying. Su Zimo took a deep breath and walked towards the depths of the Sea of Bones. The Sea of White Bones was eerie and terrifying yet unusually peaceful. After half an incense's time, Su Zimo had already walked far into the Sea of Bones. However, nothing happened. Master, let's go in as well. Don't let that lad get ahead of us if there's really something good. Someone from Heaven Azura sect suggested. Yes. The two Jining Jinjuan agreed at the same time. With a single order, they led their remaining disciples into the Sea of Bones. With their spirit energy restrained, even perfected being Jin Dan could not walk on air and could only walk on foot. Jining Jinjuan was the only one who had the ability to fly at low altitudes in the Sea of Bones. The cultivators of both sects had already made up their minds to follow Su Zimo. They wouldn't get too close, but they wouldn't get too far either. If anything were to happen, Su Zimo would die first and they would have a chance to escape. However, not long after the cultivators of both sects entered the Sea of Bones, a huge commotion occurred within. Su Zimo turned around. Waves surged through the Sea of Bones in a ferocious manner. As though they were stimulated by something, the endless white bones bounced up from the ground one after another. Under the support of some mysterious power, they took on all sorts of forms. Some of them formed gigantic white bone palms that reached out from the Sea of Bones and grabbed the crowd viciously. More than half of the cultivators of both sects died. Blood mist spewed out. Some of them transformed into ferocious beasts made of pure bones with immense strength. They were incomparably violent and killed anyone they saw. Around Su Zimo, white bones bounced up continuously as well. However, the white bones seemed to have ignored Su Zimo and the night spirit and surged towards the cultivators of both sects not far away. Could it be that the P of the night spirit is really working? Although Su Zimo did not want to believe it, that was the only possibility. Bang! One of the Jining Jinjuan clashed head-on with a white bone beast. Jining Jinjuan's expression changed starkly as he retreated 3 steps back. Immediately after, Jining Jinjuan's body exploded into a pile of meat paste without a corpse left. Jining Jinjuan could not even take a single hit from those bone beasts. When he saw that, Su Zimo knew that it was over for Heaven Azura sect and Purple Cloud sect. This Sea of Bones was their final resting place. Chapter 234. The winds and clouds changed and the bone waves surged. As though they were agitated, countless white bones surged and formed all sorts of remnant ferocious beasts. One after another, terrifying existences crawled out from the sea of bones. Malevolent auras filled the air and blood chi surged into the skies. Su Zimo could not identify the origins of those remnant ferocious beasts through their skeletal forms. However, there was no lack of human-shaped skeletons among them, and their combat strength was extremely terrifying as well. The remaining 100-odd cultivators of Heaven Azura sect and Purple Cloud sect, including Jining Jinjuan and perfected Jin Dan, were all killed by countless white-boned ferocious beasts. Fresh blood splattered and severed limbs were strewn everywhere as tragic cries rang out endlessly. When he saw that, Su Zimo felt his scalp tingle and his limbs turn cold. Was this the power of the primordial ruin? If these powerful living beings possessed such terrifying combat strength even after death, what cultivation realms were they in when they were alive? Who was it that buried them here, forming such a vast and boundless sea of bones? What was in the depths of this sea of bones? Instantly, countless questions flashed through Su Zimo's mind. At this moment, Su Zimo truly felt how insignificant he was. Even though he was already a Foundation establishment cultivator and could fly on his sword, he was still insignificant. Su Zimo walked step by step towards the depths of the sea of bones. It was as though he was walking towards an extremely foreign era. He was walking into an unknown civilization that had been buried in the river of time. The tragic cries behind him were gradually fading. The cultivators of the two sects were all buried in the sea of bones without a single survivor. One after another, the ferocious and powerful white-boned ferocious beasts fell to the ground one after another. The sea of bones regained its calmness. It was terrifyingly silent. It was as though the killing and massacre just now was merely Su Zimo's imagination. A gentle breeze blew and Su Zimo felt a chill down his spine. Unknowingly, he was already drenched in cold sweat. Su Zimo glanced at Night Spirit beside his feet. He vaguely guessed that the reason why the powerful existences in the Bone Sea didn't attack him was because of the Night Spirit. Night Spirit, on the other hand, was very alert. He sniffed the air while leading the way. Su Zimo followed behind him. In this boundless sea of bones, there was only one man and one beast. There were no signs of life in the surroundings. It was incomparably desolate. A thick fog gradually appeared in front of them. It was getting thicker and thicker, and the visibility was extremely low. Within the fog, there was some moisture and a fishy smell. After an unknown period of time, a grayish-white stone pillar stood tall in the fog ahead. It was extremely thick and towered into the clouds. Su Zimo stood in front of this stone pillar, appearing extremely small. Su Zimo reached out and touched the stone pillar. This was out of Su Zimo's expectation. This gigantic stone pillar was left behind from the primordial era. After being battered by wind and rain and the passage of time, its surface was still as smooth as jade without any hint of roughness. Under normal circumstances, even supreme-grade spirit weapons would have lost their spirituality after tens of thousands of years, let alone stone pillars. Furthermore, the primordial era was probably millions or even tens of millions of years away from the present. This stone pillar is a treasure. If only I could carry it away. Su Zimo circled the stone pillar a few times and lamented internally. Of course, that was just a random thought. Given Su Zimo's strength, there was no way he could stuff this stone pillar into his storage bag. Even if Su Zimo had the ability, there was no way he could do that. Given how terrifying the Bone Sea was, who knew what the purpose of such a gigantic stone pillar was? What if he alarmed the terrifying existences in the Bone Sea by moving this stone pillar? Su Zimo circled the stone pillar once more and found no traces on it. Strange. A look of confusion flashed through Su Zimo's eyes. Initially, he thought that there might be some information, patterns, or even traces of the primordial era carved on the stone pillar. However, there was nothing on the surface of the stone pillar. A gust of wind blew through the Bone Sea and the fog dissipated slightly. Su Zimo looked around and his gaze froze as he exclaimed softly. 1,000 feet away from this stone pillar, there was another stone pillar standing right next to it. Su Zimo walked over to take a look. This stone pillar was almost the same as the first one he saw. The surface of the stone pillar was as smooth as jade and there were no traces left behind. As they continued to walk in this direction, a thick and solid stone pillar like this would appear almost every 1,000 feet. What's going on? Su Zimo pondered for a moment but could not figure it out. Under the urging of the night spirit, he continued walking forward. Before long, Su Zimo stopped in his tracks once more. He had arrived at the end of the Bone Sea. At the end of the Bone Sea was a towering mountain peak that pierced through the clouds. It was lush and full of life with lush vegetation. There were even green waters at the foot of the mountain, making it look like an immortal realm. For a moment, Su Zimo could not react to the sudden arrival of a vibrant mountain peak from the dead silent Bone Sea. Suddenly, Su Zimo thought of a possibility. The Bone Sea behind him was truly just the edge of the primordial ruin. However, this mountain peak before him might be the center of the primordial ruin. Or perhaps, this mountain peak was not even the center of the ruin and he would only be able to truly come into contact with the secrets of the ruin after crossing the mountain peak? Be it the primordial forest or the Bone Sea behind him, they were merely the defensive lines that protected the center of the ruin. Yeah. The night spirit called out a few times and urged Su Zimo to continue walking forward. When he arrived at the foot of the mountain, Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat as though he sensed something. Glancing sideways, Su Zimo looked towards the forest at the side. Not far away, a figure suddenly appeared beside an ancient tree. He wore gray robes and was slightly plump, holding a folding fan in his hands and had a fair face without a beard. It's you. It's you. The two of them exchanged glances and were stunned for a moment before exclaiming. Su Zimo had not expected to meet this gray-robed cultivator here. Back in the primordial forest, Su Zimo had already discovered that this gray-robed cultivator was not simple and had some tricks up his sleeves. However, after entering the Bone Sea, Su Zimo thought that this person had already died in the Bone Sea. To think that this person would have arrived at this mountain peak first. While Su Zimo was surprised, the gray-robed cultivator was even more shocked. Given his eyesight, he could naturally tell that Su Zimo was only a foundation establishment cultivator and there was no way he could have concealed his cultivation realm. The gray-robed cultivator had long known that these tens of thousands of cultivators who wanted to enter the primordial ruin would all die. Apart from him, no one else would survive. To think that this seemingly ordinary green-robed cultivator would be able to cross the Bone Sea. He could understand why the green-robed cultivator could cross the primordial forest. After all, the green-robed cultivator was smart enough to choose to follow behind him in the forest. However, he had already shaken that person off at the end. Interesting. The gray-robed cultivator walked towards Su Zimo slowly with a malicious smile on his face. Chapter 235. Su Zimo narrowed his gaze warily. Although the gray-robed cultivator before him was only at early-stage foundation establishment, Su Zimo did not dare to be careless. This person exuded a strange aura from head to toe and was unfathomable. Furthermore, the fact that this person could pass through the primordial forest and sea of bones with ease was enough for Su Zimo to be wary of him. The gray-robed cultivator arrived about 10 meters away from Su Zimo and stopped in his tracks. Raising his brow slightly, he asked with a fake smile, "Fellow Taoist, you sure are following me closely? I can't shake you off even with that." Su Zimo looked at the person calmly in silence. A mocking look flashed through the gray-robed cultivator's eyes as his expression darkened. Suddenly, he retracted his smile and asked coldly, "Tell me, where are you from and why are you following me?" With that said, the gray-robed cultivator glared at Su Zimo's face, trying to find a loophole in Su Zimo's expression and gaze. "I'm not following you." Su Zimo was expressionless as he shook his head. That was the truth to begin with. The gray-robed cultivator could not help but frown when he failed to find anything. Could it really be a coincidence? No. The gray-robed cultivator thought about it. Even if it's a coincidence, I can't let him continue forward. If my plans are ruined because of him, I'll lose more than I gain. How did you pass through the sea of bones? Suddenly, the gray-robed cultivator asked. I walked over. When he heard that answer, the gray-robed cultivator's mouth twitched as he hesitated to speak. The gray-robed cultivator's gaze swept across Su Zimo before landing on Night Spirit, who was beside his feet. When he saw Night Spirit, the gray-robed cultivator could no longer hold it in and rolled his eyes. The gray-robed cultivator mocked, "Fellow Taoist, your preferences are truly extraordinary. Everyone else would look for the cubs of ancient remnant beasts or pure-blooded ferocious beasts as their battle beasts. Yet, you're rearing a black dog cub. None of your business." Su Zimo sneered and retorted. The gray-robed cultivator was not angry as he waved the folding fan in his hands and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, let me give you a piece of advice. Since you can pass through the sea of bones, I advise you to turn back and stop advancing. This is not a place you can come to." The gray-robed cultivator pointed to the mountain peak beside him and said word by word with a stern expression. Su Zimo did not reply. He wanted to turn back as well. To be precise, right from the beginning, Su Zimo had no intention of taking the initiative to step into this place. Su Zimo's choice because he was cornered to his back too. If he turned back now, he would choose. Furthermore, it was all thanks to Night Spirit's guidance and perseverance that he was able to reach this point. There was no way he was going to retreat that easily. You? The gray-robed cultivator frowned and murmured, "That's troublesome. I can't possibly allow you to follow me and ruin my plans. You go your way and I'll go mine. We won't interfere with each other." Su Zimo was wary of the gray-robed cultivator and did not want to get into a conflict with him. The gray-robed cultivator remained silent for a moment before shaking his head. "No, that's too risky. Since you're not retreating, don't blame me." When he heard that, Su Zimo's expression changed and he attacked without hesitation. The two of them were extremely close. If nothing went wrong, Su Zimo was 70% confident that he could suppress the gray-robed cultivator. Boom! A clear footprint appeared on the ground with the plow heaven stride and the surrounding mud flew everywhere. Almost instantly, Su Zimo arrived before the gray-robed cultivator. Channeling his bloodline, the sound of a tsunami could be heard from within his body, accompanied by lightning and thunder in a terrifying manner. Against Su Zimo's preemptive attack and hearing the sounds coming from Su Zimo's body, the gray-robed cultivator did not panic at all. Instead, he exclaimed softly with a hint of curiosity in his eyes. "Such a powerful bloodline. How did you cultivate?" Without saying anything, Su Zimo swung his arm and punched in reverse towards the gray-robed cultivator's head. It was like a gigantic seal that crashed down. Not bad, not bad. Against Su Zimo's move, the gray-robed cultivator did not dodge or avoid it. Instead, he nodded and praised. Suddenly, the gray-robed cultivator reached out with his folding fan and tapped Su Zimo's wrist gently. The speed of this attack was extremely fast. Although it was launched later, it arrived first. The landing point was precise and the timing was impeccable. Bang! Su Zimo's wrist went numb and the power of the punch dissipated. Right after, Su Zimo's wrist felt a piercing pain as though it was broken. The gray-robed cultivator chuckled and took out a rope from nowhere. He tossed it gently in Su Zimo's direction and muttered, "Bind." The rope quickly coiled around Su Zimo's body, binding his arms and legs to the sides of his body, coiling round after round. In the blink of an eye, Su Zimo was bound tightly by that inconspicuous rope and could not move at all. A black shadow darted out. "Night Spirit, don't move." Su Zimo called out to Night Spirit hurriedly. Actually, the moment the gray-robed cultivator attacked, Su Zimo had already realized that this person was definitely not at early-stage Foundation establishment. he could be perfected Jin Dan or Jinying Jinjuan. At the very least, the gray-robed cultivator's cultivation realm was far above his. Against such a strong cultivator, Night Spirit would not be able to do anything even if he charged forward. In fact, he might even be killed by the gray-robed cultivator in a single move. Night Spirit stopped in his tracks and glared at the gray-robed cultivator coldly. He stuck his head out and growled from the depths of his throat with a chilling killing intent. Ha! Arriving before Night Spirit, the gray-robed cultivator squatted down and said with a smile, "Black puppy, you've got some guts, huh? How dare you be fierce to me?" The man and beast were extremely close to each other. Night Spirit could reach him with a single raise of his hand. However, after a moment, Night Spirit did not attack and his gaze was still cold. Smiling, the gray-robed cultivator extended his folding fan and tapped Night Spirit on the head. "Not bad, you're quite smart. Consider yourself lucky." Su Zimo heaved a sigh of relief. Naturally, he could tell that just now, the gray-robed cultivator was luring Night Spirit to attack on purpose. If Night Spirit had truly attacked, not only would he not be able to injure the gray-robed cultivator, the latter would even take the opportunity to kill Night Spirit. Standing up, the gray-robed cultivator looked at Su Zimo with a helpless expression and shrugged. "Since you're unwilling to leave, I can only trap you here. Also, this is the demon-suppressing rope. Oh, I don't think you've heard of it before." The gray-robed cultivator continued, "The demon-suppressing rope can even bind pure-blooded ferocious beasts tightly. Although your physique is strong, it's not a match for pure-blooded ferocious beasts. Don't try to break free or you'll just be asking for trouble." Su Zimo did not reply. Turning around, the gray-robed cultivator took a few steps, seemingly worried as he said, "Stay here obediently. I'll come down in a while to help you release the demon-suppressing rope." With that said, the gray-robed cultivator darted into the forest and disappeared towards the peak of the mountain. Chapter 236. Two figures stumbled out of the primordial forest and descended before the Sea of Bones. "Thank you for saving me, Master," the Blood Crow King said with lingering fear. If not for the Palace Lord, he would not have been able to pass through the primordial forest with his own strength. The Palace Lord nodded and turned back to look at the remnant ferocious beasts that were retreating in the forest, heaving a sigh of relief. Even with his strength as a void reversion, he had to be careful in passing through the primordial forest. If he were to encounter the overlord of the forest, he could only retreat to protect himself. "Master, are we still going to chase? That lad is only a Foundation establishment cultivator. Can he really pass through the primordial forest?" The Blood Crow King's tone was clearly doubtful. Surveying his surroundings, the Palace Lord noticed the traces left behind by the Heaven Azura sect and Purple Cloud sect cultivators and nodded. "Yes, that lad's luck is not bad. He should have escaped from the crowd." Narrowing his eyes, the Palace Lord looked at the Sea of Bones before him in silence. In the depths of the Blood Crow King's eyes, there was a deep shock. There were so many white bones piled up into a sea. Furthermore, these were bones left behind from the primordial era that had yet to rot. How strong was the owner of these bones back then? "Master, are we going to pass through the Sea of Bones?" the Blood Crow King asked carefully at the side. Since there were no traces of Su Zimo here, logically speaking, Su Zimo should have stepped into the Sea of Bones. However, for some reason, the Blood Crow King felt his heart skip a beat against the Sea of Bones. Shaking his head, the Palace Lord said, "I'll use a secret skill to check on that lad's location." "Blood Curse Guide." The Palace Lord hollered softly as a dark light shone from his eyes. The dark light spread out like smoke and ink, forming a green rune in midair that emitted a strange energy fluctuation. The Palace Lord exclaimed softly as the rune gradually dissipated. The Blood Crow King asked, "Master, what's wrong?" Frowning, the Palace Lord shook his head. "This doesn't make sense. That lad should have already passed through the sea of bones. How could a Foundation establishment cultivator like him pass through this place? Could there be a background to that lad's identity? The palace lord's eyes flickered as he fell into deep thought. Wait here, I'll go take a look myself. The palace lord of the Blood Crow Palace said to the Blood Crow King. Then, he came to the edge of the Sea of Bones and chanted a mysterious incantation. Immediately after, the palace lord bit his tongue gently and spat out a drop of essence blood. Under the enhancement of the incantation, that drop of essence blood formed a blood-colored light barrier that enveloped the palace lord's surroundings. The Blood Crow Palace's lord stepped into the Sea of Bones. After a few steps, the Sea of Bones seemed to have sensed something, and waves of bones surged. Countless white bones leaped up from the ground, condensing into powerful white bone beasts in midair. They were ferocious and terrifying, and mysterious flames leaped from the holes in their skulls. Roar! A series of roars could be heard from the Sea of Bones, causing the weather to change. The Blood Crow King, who was standing at the edge of the Sea of Bones, was so frightened that his legs turned to jelly. With his cultivation, he could clearly feel the terrifying aura emanating from these skeletal beasts. Any one of these white-boned ferocious beasts could easily tear him to pieces if they rushed out. Surrounded by white-boned ferocious beasts, the Blood Crow Palace's lord continued forward with a calm expression. Those white-boned beasts glared at the palace lord and carefully identified the blood mist on the latter's body. After hesitating for a long time, they gradually dispersed and returned to the Sea of Bones, returning to peace. The moment the palace lord released his secret skill to check on Su Zimo's whereabouts, at the end of the Sea of Bones, at the foot of a godly mountain, Su Zimo's eyes shone with a faint green color as he felt a sharp pain in his mind. Immediately after, Su Zimo's vision blurred and he caught sight of the blood-robed young man who had died in his hands smiling sinisterly at him once more. The pain and illusion disappeared in a flash. Before long, there was a commotion in the Sea of Bones behind him, as though someone had barged in. They chased me all the way here. Su Zimo's expression was terrible. Initially, he thought that the primordial forest alone would be enough to stop the pursuers behind him. But now, it seemed like the other party had still entered the Sea of Bones. Right now, there were only two possibilities. If the other party had the ability to cross the Sea of Bones, he would definitely die. The second possibility was that the white bone beasts in the Sea of Bones killed all the pursuers behind him. Su Zimo did not dare to take the risk. Su Zimo looked at the rope that was tied around his body and struggled slightly. However, he realized that there were no signs of loosening at all. Su Zimo sneered internally and burst forth with his blood chi. Rumble. Boom. Boom. His blood surged within his body and a rich demonic chi burst forth. His flesh was filled and his tendons trembled as Su Zimo's body expanded. Buzz. The demon-suppressing rope shone brightly in a resplendent manner, suppressing Su Zimo's blood chi instantly. Ugh! Su Zimo's expression changed as he grunted dully. The demon-suppressing rope did not loosen. Instead, it dug into Su Zimo's flesh and blood seeped out, dyeing his green robes red. Hurriedly, Su Zimo calmed his blood chi and allowed his body to return to normal. The wounds on his body caused by the demon-suppressing rope were nothing much, they were merely superficial wounds. Given Su Zimo's powerful regeneration capabilities, he would be able to recover quickly. However, how he was going to break free was a tricky problem. Su Zimo could not possibly wait here foolishly for the gray-robed cultivator to return and help him undo the demon-suppressing rope. By then, he would probably be a dead man. An idea flashed through Su Zimo's mind. Since he could not break free in a head-on clash, he might as well use tendons and bones transformation. A series of crackling sounds could be heard from Su Zimo's body as his tendons and bones rang together. Su Zimo's body shrank at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the blink of an eye, Su Zimo's body shrunk to a height of only a meter. He was extremely short. However, to Su Zimo's shock, the demon-suppressing rope changed as well and shrunk continuously. It was still wrapped tightly around Su Zimo's body and he could not break free at all. That was the power of the demon-suppressing rope. That was because demon beasts could change their appearances after cultivating their inner cores. No matter how huge a demon beast was, they could take on a human form. However, once they were bound by the demon-suppressing rope, they would not be able to break free no matter how they transformed. Su Zimo was at his wit's end. Right then, Night Spirit closed in and extended its sharp claws that shone with a cold glint. It hooked onto a section of the rope and tore at it repeatedly. A moment later, the demon-suppressing rope snapped. The moment the rope snapped, the glow on the demon-suppressing rope dimmed and it fell from Su Zimo's body. Su Zimo was delighted. Hia! Night Spirit called out hurriedly and turned back, sprinting up the mountain. Su Zimo followed hurriedly. Chapter 237. The gray-robed cultivator tiptoed through the forest, looking nervous and sneaky. He held a folding fan in one hand and a metal rod that was as thick as a finger in the other. At the top of the metal rod, there was a thin needle that spun continuously, guiding the direction. After walking for a while, the gray-robed cultivator would stop in his tracks and wait for the needle at the top of the metal rod to fix on a certain direction before continuing in that direction. Along the way, the gray-robed cultivator did not move quickly. Is this old man's earth spirit ruler reliable? It spins around without a fixed direction. The gray-robed cultivator grumbled as he walked. On the other side, Night Spirit brought Su Zimo through the forest of the Godly Mountain at an extremely fast speed. As Night Spirit sprinted, his nose twitched as though he was sniffing something as they walked further and further on the Godly Mountain. A long time later, Night Spirit arrived before a gigantic cave and stopped. Su Zimo raised his head and looked at the cave with a shocked expression. His mouth was agape and he was speechless for a long time. The size of the cave had completely exceeded his imagination. Standing before the entrance of the cave, Su Zimo felt like an ant. Standing before the majestic palace, he felt incomparably small. Who was it that carved out such a gigantic cave in the Godly Mountain? There were no signs of it being carved out by axes at the edges of the cave. Such methods could be considered as uncanny workmanship. What was the use of such a gigantic cave? Grr! Night Spirit bit Su Zimo's sleeves and continued tugging at him, indicating for him to hurry into the cave. Taking a deep breath of air, Su Zimo could not help but turn back before entering the cave. That single glance caused Su Zimo's gaze to freeze and he could not shift it away. The gigantic cave was halfway up the mountain. Standing there, Su Zimo looked down at the sea of bones from above and his vision was naturally wider. Standing halfway up the mountain, one could vaguely see 2 rows of stone pillars juxtaposed in the sea of bones. The top of the stone pillars was almost at the same level as the middle of the mountain. From this, one could see how tall the stone pillars were. The top of the 2 rows of stone pillars were bent towards the middle and embedded into a huge and thick beam. The beam was covered with barbs and was even thicker than the stone pillars. What is this? Su Zimo's eyes flashed with doubt. He had a feeling that the combination of these stone pillars and beams was like something. After pondering for a while, Su Zimo had no clue, so he followed Night Spirit into the cave. At the same time, Blood Crow Palace's lord walked out of the sea of bones safely and heaved a sigh of relief. Blood Crow Palace's lord did not move at all. Focusing his senses, he could not help but scoff coldly, to think that they're still escaping. I want to see where you can run to today. Following the guidance of the blood curse, the palace lord sped towards the divine mountain. Before long, a figure appeared in front of the gigantic cave halfway up the mountain. Wearing gray robes, he held a folding fan in one hand and an earth spirit ruler in the other. The old man didn't lie to me. Although this earth spirit ruler is a little slow, it didn't make a mistake. I've really found it. Looking at the gigantic cave before him, the gray-robed cultivator could not help but chuckle in delight. If it's meant to be, it will be. If it's not meant to be, don't force it. Shaking his head, the gray-robed cultivator waved his folding fan and muttered gleefully as he walked into the cave. Su Zimo had long noticed that ever since he stepped foot into the primordial ruin, Night Spirit's state was different from usual. He was a little excited and nervous. This was the first time such complicated emotions had appeared on Night Spirit. Back when Haka-Edojin died, he did not specify whether Night Spirit came from the primordial ruin or the ancient ruin. Su Zimo had once suspected that Night Spirit might have some sort of connection with the primordial ruin. Or perhaps, he could boldly speculate that Night Spirit came from the primordial ruin. After all, throughout his observations, Night Spirit's behavior was way too unusual. The cave was extremely spacious and was almost unobstructed. After a long time, the man and beast finally arrived at the deepest part of the cave. This is, at the end of the cave, there was a grayish-white oval object that was as tall as a person. Su Zimo was dumbfounded as he muttered to himself in disbelief, "That's an egg? What sort of demon beast would give birth to such a gigantic egg?" Arriving before the gigantic egg, Su Zimo reached out to touch it and feel it. There were no patterns on the egg at all. This meant that it had not been born for long, at most a month. In that case, the phenomenon that many cultivators witnessed a month ago should have been caused by the birth of this demon beast egg. Su Zimo recalled everything he knew about the demon beast egg. A moment later, Su Zimo still could not figure out what sort of demon beast could give birth to such a gigantic and frightening egg. The Night Spirit slithered up Su Zimo's clothes and arrived at Su Zimo's chest in a few moments, blinking its beady eyes in a flaunting manner. Su Zimo frowned in deep thought as he looked at the egg before him. He had a feeling that he would be able to get an answer if he connected all the pieces of information along the way. Stone pillars, beams, cave, egg. Suddenly, a thought flashed through Su Zimo's mind. At the thought of that possibility, Su Zimo could not help but be shocked. Initially, Su Zimo was puzzled when he saw the gray stone pillars in the Sea of Bones. Why were there so many stone pillars in the Sea of Bones? Furthermore, the surface of those stone pillars was as smooth as jade. Why were there no traces of time left on them after so many years since the primordial era? What sort of stone could be so tough? It was only at this moment that Su Zimo came to a realization. Those were not stone pillars at all. They were skeletons. The skeletons of an existence that was once incomparably strong. Those stone pillars that were arranged in 2 rows were actually the ribs of that powerful living being. The beam, in the middle, which was even thicker and full of barbs, was the spine of this creature. It was precisely because they were skeletons that they appeared in the Sea of Bones. The cave that he was in right now should have been created by the race of that terrifying living being. What sort of a living being could possess such a frightening body? Although its flesh had already rotted after so many years of death, there were no traces left on its bones. They were as smooth as jade and did not decay at all. What was its cultivation realm when it was alive? A primordial being. To think that a primordial being that was already extinct in Tianhuang mainland would be hidden here. If he was not wrong, the gigantic egg before him should have been created by such a primordial being. At that thought, Su Zimo could not help but gulp. Piak! Suddenly, a crisp sound reverberated through the cave. Su Zimo's pupils constricted. The Night Spirit sprawled before his chest had actually reached out with its claws and pierced the gigantic egg before it. Chapter 238. Night Spirit, you. Su Zimo was speechless. Even though the Night Spirit had not been born for a long time, it was extremely intelligent. Be it its stunning performance in killing the Jin Dan realm spirit demon in Dongling Valley or its actions after entering the primordial ruin, it was enough to prove that Night Spirit was extraordinary. However, this time round, Su Zimo realized that Night Spirit was in trouble. Furthermore, it was a fatal disaster. It was clear that the egg before him had just been born. In other words, there was a high chance that the unknown primordial life form that laid the egg was nearby. Even though he had not witnessed the terror of the primordial life form personally, he could tell through the forest and sea of bones outside. A single finger from such a terrifying existence was enough to crush him into minced meat. Hia! Night Spirit called out softly, as though it wanted Suzumo to hug it. Suzumo's heart was in a mess as he hugged Night Spirit instinctively. Night Spirit craned its neck and only released its claws when it was in front of the gigantic egg. A small hole appeared on the surface of the eggshell, and golden yellow egg juice flowed out of it. It was sparkling and translucent with multicolored light, sparkling and dazzling. Night Spirit opened its mouth hurriedly and sucked at the hole on the eggshell. Gulp! Gulp! Night Spirit gulped down mouthfuls of juice. Why you ate it? Suzumo's eyes widened in disbelief as he watched everything unfold. Instinctively, Suzumo wanted to drag Night Spirit away. However, on second thought, even if he took Night Spirit away now, he had already caused a huge disaster. It was clear that the egg was not going to survive. Furthermore, ever since Night Spirit was born, Suzumo, Monkey, Linghu and Little Crane had tried their best to prepare all sorts of food for it. However, Night Spirit did not seem to be interested. Night Spirit did not touch the flesh of wild beasts, ordinary spirit beasts and spirit demons at all. Night Spirit would only try to eat the flesh of ancient remnant beasts. During this period of time, Night Spirit's body did not grow much and was only slightly larger than before. Its skin was a little rough with faint ripples. It was rare to see Night Spirit so fond of the egg juice. It looked intoxicated and was even gulping it down greedily. Suzumo's heart softened as he sighed. Forget it, let it eat its fill. The egg juice entered Night Spirit's stomach continuously and the shell turned transparent. One could see the speed at which Night Spirit was gulping down the egg juice. Under Suzumo's gaze, the egg, the Night Spirits, before it could stop. This demonic beast egg was as tall as a person. How old was Night Spirit? If he had not witnessed it for himself, Suzumo would not have been able to imagine how Night Spirit's small and skinny body could contain so much egg juice. Night Spirit's stomach was so bloated that it was almost like an airbag. It swayed gently and let out the sound of flowing water. Night Spirit looked at the egg before it with glowing eyes and licked its lips. Aren't you afraid of bursting? Suzumo shook his head and scolded in amusement. However, it made sense. An opportunity as such would probably never appear again. It was no wonder why Night Spirit was so gluttonous. Since you're done eating, let's hurry and retreat. Let's see if we can escape. Suzumo had a feeling that the shattering of the egg might have alarmed the terrifying existence in the primordial ruin. Hia! Night Spirit cried out. The moment Night Spirit opened its mouth, it spat out balls of light that were bedazzling and dazzling. The glow contained extremely rich and pure life essence. Suzumo shuddered. His body was nourished by the glow and he could clearly sense all sorts of strange changes happening in his body. Night Spirit shut its mouth hurriedly and gestured before pointing to the demon beast egg before it. You want me to eat the rest? Suzumo understood what Night Spirit meant and was shocked. Night Spirit nodded hurriedly, indicating that the egg juice was the most delicious thing and urging Suzumo to eat it quickly. Suzumo was a little hesitant. Night Spirit gestured again, indicating that it could no longer eat and it would be a pity to leave the rest of the egg juice here. Suzumo grit his teeth and made up his mind. Since he had already gotten himself into big trouble, what was there to worry about? Suzumo placed Night Spirit in his embrace and walked forward. Hugging the gigantic demon beast egg with both hands, he faced the small hole and started gulping down mouthfuls. It's a little fishy and not very delicious. A thought flashed through Suzumo's mind. A cool and smooth liquid flowed through his throat and into his stomach. Boom! Instantly, Su Zimo felt as though his body was about to explode. The energy contained in the liquid was much greater than Su Zimo had imagined. The moment the energy entered his stomach, it exploded instantly and turned into a divine light that surged through Su Zimo's body, flowing through his limbs and bones. The energy nourished his skin, flesh, tendons, bones, and marrow as well as Su Zimo's organs. At this moment, Su Zimo realized that the liquid in the egg was definitely a great tonic for him. In fact, it was many times more effective than the inner cores of demon beasts. If he could digest all the energy in the liquid, he could even break through to the greater success of organs refinement. Opportunity. This was an unimaginably great opportunity. Of course, the premise of all this was that he could escape from this place. Su Zimo gulped down mouthfuls of the liquid. He finally experienced the feeling of reluctance and unsatiation after Night Spirit stopped swallowing. There was probably nothing in this world that could be purer than the energy in the liquid without any impurities. The energy was way too strong. It rampaged through Su Zimo's body and started spewing out light through his pores. Su Zimo's surroundings were filled with divine light and mist. In the haze, he looked like a god. Su Zimo knew that the energy contained in the liquid was extremely rare. Taking a deep breath of air, Su Zimo hurriedly closed his pores and locked in the essence chi within his body. However, the energy was way too dense. Given Su Zimo's physique, it was difficult for him to contain it within a short period of time. Su Zimo's eyes, ears, nostrils and mouth shone with a resplendent glow that surged with essence chi. It was a frightening sight. Under the pressure of that energy, Su Zimo's eyes shone with a faint green color. Before long, the evil energy hidden in Su Zimo's eyes was forced out by the pure energy in the liquid. That evil energy was left in Su Zimo's body by the blood-robed youth using the blood slave art. 2 drops of faint green liquid dripped down from the corner of Su Zimo's eyes and landed on the ground. They did not dissipate and shone with a faint light. Su Zimo was delighted. He had not expected that the liquid in the demon beast egg would resolve the hidden danger in his body. This meant that as long as Su Zimo escaped from this place, his pursuers would no longer be able to locate him through any secret skills. Chapter 239. Before long, Su Zimo finished the juice of the demon beast egg. Not wanting to waste the essence energy in his body, Su Zimo closed his pores hurriedly and locked his 7 orifices. A warm current surged through his body and he felt as though he was about to explode. The body tempering section, tendons transformation section, bones strengthening section, marrow cleansing section and organs refinement section echoed in Su Zimo's mind. Su Zimo tried his best to calm that energy. A moment later, it was clear that the energy was much calmer and no longer rampaged through his body. Even so, Su Zimo did not dare to open his pores and unlock his 7 orifices rashly. All of a sudden, Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. He could vaguely sense that someone was sprinting over at an extremely fast speed with their clothes fluttering. Su Zimo's expression changed slightly as he turned back hurriedly. After the gray-robed cultivator entered the cave, he put away the earth spirit ruler. The cave was tall and wide and did not seem like it was created by humans. However, the interior was not complicated. As long as one walked along the cave, they would definitely reach the depths. After walking for a while, the gray-robed cultivator suddenly stopped in his tracks and frowned. Strange, why do I feel that something is amiss? The gray-robed cultivator murmured softly. As he continued forward, he opened his palm and his thumb made contact with his other 4 fingers as he began to deduce. A moment later, the gray-robed cultivator's expression changed starkly as he exclaimed softly, "Something happened? How could this be?" Gritting his teeth, the gray-robed cultivator hastened his footsteps and sprinted towards the depths of the cave. Could someone have beaten me to it and ruined my plans? Who could it be? That's impossible. There were only 2 people who passed through the primordial forest and sea of bones. Furthermore, that green-robed cultivator was bound by my demon-suppressing rope and there's no way he could have broken free. What's the problem? The gray-robed cultivator's mind was in a mess as countless thoughts flashed through his mind. After turning a corner, his vision opened up. A gigantic egg entered his vision. The gray-robed cultivator's initially tensed heart finally calmed down and he heaved a sigh of relief, lamenting to himself, thankfully, I'm not too late. The egg is still here. However, the next moment, the gray-robed cultivator's heart skipped a beat once more. Beside the gigantic egg stood a green-robed cultivator. The green-robed cultivator seemed to have heard his footsteps and suddenly turned around. The clothes on his chest were open, revealing a pitch-black puppy head. The man and the beast both pursed their lips tightly, their expressions strange, as if they were holding their breaths. It's you. The gray-robed cultivator was stunned. For a moment, he still couldn't understand how the people who had been bound by the demon-binding rope at the foot of the mountain had arrived here first. It's him. Su Zimo was also stunned. Instantly, Su Zimo realized that the gray-robed cultivator's objective for this trip should be the demon beast egg beside him. Feeling a little guilty, Su Zimo could not help but avoid the gray-robed cultivator's gaze. The gray-robed cultivator's thoughts were all on the demon beast egg and he did not notice Su Zimo's abnormality. As he walked forward, he said, "Fellow Taoist, I don't care how you broke free from the demon-binding rope. However, this egg has to be mine. Of course, given your cultivation, you won't be a match for me if you want to fight for this egg." The gray-robed cultivator was filled with confidence as he glanced sideways at Su Zimo. Su Zimo did not say anything and did not even dare to breathe. Right now, as long as Su Zimo opened his mouth to speak, auspicious colors would spew out with a divine radiance. By then, the gray-robed cultivator had already arrived before the demon beast egg. Sweeping his gaze across it, he frowned slightly and murmured, "Why is there a white spot on it that's even glowing?" His voice stopped abruptly. Suddenly, the gray-robed cultivator could not continue. His eyes were fixated on the small hole on the demon beast egg. His face was livid and his mouth twitched, as though he was on the verge of breaking down. Night Spirit was too young after all and could not hold it in any longer as she opened her mouth and cried out. A rich essence aura flashed by. As though he sensed something, the gray-robed cultivator spun around. Seeing that he could not hide it any longer, Su Zimo could no longer hold it in and spat out a mouthful of turbid air. Immediately after, multicolored lights spewed out from Su Zimo's mouth and nose in a dazzling manner. F***ck, when he saw that, there was no way the gray-robed cultivator did not know what was going on. Instantly, he was enraged and nearly spat out a mouthful of blood. Su Zimo did not dare to stay on the spot and hurriedly used Divine Steed fleeting to speed out of the cave. F***ck, you're still trying to escape. The gray-robed cultivator's eyes were red as he hollered. Waving his arm, the gray-robed cultivator's sleeves expanded and reached first, circling Su Zimo a few times and pulling him back instantly. "Hey, what are you doing?" Su Zimo questioned fiercely. Unexpectedly, the moment he opened his mouth, another mouthful of multicolored light sprayed onto the gray-robed cultivator's face. F***ck, the gray-robed cultivator was so angry that he was trembling. Grabbing Su Zimo's collar, he gritted his teeth and said, "How dare you eat that egg? How dare you F***king eat it? What a waste of a heavenly treasure. Do you know what kind of living being is in that egg?" When Su Zimo saw that the person was in a berserk state, he was afraid that the latter would lose his mind and replied honestly, "I don't know." "You ate it just because you don't know?" Letting go of Su Zimo, the gray-robed cultivator wailed as though his parents had passed away. "Didn't I go through so much trouble to come all the way here just for that egg? But in the end, you F***king ate it. I hate it." At that moment, the gray-robed cultivator even had the thought of dying. This foundation establishment cultivator that popped out of nowhere had F***ed him badly. If the old man were to know about this, he would definitely be mocked to death. Lad, just you wait for your death. How dare you eat that egg? Fu. The gray-robed cultivator looked at Su Zimo and sneered. Su Zimo did not say anything. The more the gray-robed cultivator thought about it, the more aggrieved he felt. He closed in again and grit his teeth. How much did you eat? You're spewing multicolored light from your mouth. How can you eat that much by yourself? Ugh. Right then, Night Spirit, who was initially hiding in Su Zimo's embrace, suddenly stuck its head out and burped. A few beams of golden light shot out from its nose and mouth as well. F***ck, the gray-robed cultivator rolled his eyes and felt dizzy, nearly fainting. That dog ate that much as well. Why you? The gray-robed cultivator pointed at Su Zimo's face, so angry that he could not speak. Suddenly, as though he had thought of something, the gray-robed cultivator hurriedly ran to the egg and waved the folding fan in his hands, smashing the egg into several pieces. There was not much juice left in the egg and only a little was left on the eggshell. I don't care, I'll try it too. The gray-robed cultivator mumbled and could not be bothered anymore. Holding a piece of the eggshell with both hands, he stuck out his tongue and licked it without caring about his image. Chapter 240. Following the guidance of the power of the blood curse, the palace lord arrived at the entrance of a cave halfway up the mountain. This cave entrance, raising his head to look at the gigantic cave entrance, a hint of fear flashed through the depths of the palace lord's eyes as he hesitated. That lad couldn't have really run inside, right? Frowning slightly, the palace lord's gaze flickered and he could not make up his mind for a moment. Given his status, he might not necessarily anger those terrifying living beings if he were to forcefully pass through the primordial forest and sea of bones. At most, he could just reveal his identity at the end. However, if he were to step foot into this cave, he would definitely be killed. Just as the palace lord was hesitating, an extremely terrifying aura came from behind the godly mountain and a bone-chilling killing intent arrived. When he sensed that aura, the palace lord's expression changed. In the depths of the cave, the gray-robed cultivator licked every single eggshell no less than 3 times. The insides of the eggshells were so clean that they could even reflect one's reflection, they could be used as mirrors. Su Zimo was dumbfounded. Su Zimo lowered his head and glanced at Night Spirit, lamenting internally, even if Night Spirit were to lick it, he wouldn't be able to do it so cleanly. Is this man a dog? How could he have known that just the juice on the eggshells was enough to drive the gray-robed cultivator crazy? That energy was way too pure and rich without any impurities. If it was completely absorbed by the body, the changes it would cause to the body and soul were obvious. Gritting his teeth, the gray-robed cultivator glared at Su Zimo and Night Spirit at the side with resentment, getting angrier the more he thought about it. That man and beast had eaten so much that their bodies could no longer contain it. It was such a waste for them to spew out light the moment they opened their mouths. It was one thing for a man to eat it, but to think that he would feed it to a dog. Su Zimo, who was standing at the side, frowned as the uneasiness in his heart intensified. He had long wanted to leave this place, but the gray-robed cultivator had no intention of letting him leave. Helpless, Su Zimo could only wait and watch as the gray-robed cultivator licked the eggshell like a madman. Looking at how the gray-robed cultivator was about to lick it once more, Su Zimo could not hold it in any longer and asked probingly, "Fellow Taoist, why don't you bring these eggshells back and lick them later?" The gray-robed cultivator paused and his lips twitched as his eyes burned with rage. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Why the f***ck did I leave my shell? It's all because of you and that black dog of yours. Without waiting for the gray-robed cultivator to get angry, Su Zimo reminded, "Indeed, I don't know what living being is in this egg. However, I do know that if we don't leave now, we'll definitely die." The gray-robed cultivator pursed his lips and licked his lips. The gray-robed cultivator looked askance at Su Zimo with a disdainful expression and waved his hand nonchalantly. Correction, you're the one who's going to die. I'm not going to die. Su Zimo frowned. The gray-robed cultivator seemed to have thought of something and said, right, correction. Even if you escape now, it's too late. Since you've already eaten this egg, the living beings here must have been alerted. Even if you escape, you won't be able to escape death. Don't forget, you ate it too. Su Zimo pointed to the eggshell in the gray-robed cultivator's hands and sneered, I don't believe that the living beings here will spare your life. Foo-foo. The gray-robed cultivator laughed and shook his head. You don't have to worry about that. I have my own means to leave this place. You can just wait for your death here obediently. When he heard that, Su Zimo's mind started racing even though he was expressionless on the surface. Swoosh. Right then, an extremely terrifying aura descended and shrouded the surroundings of the godly mountain, surging in from the entrance of the cave. Roar! 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 Then, a loud and resounding roar came from the sky behind the sacred mountain. The roar was so fast that it almost arrived in front of them in an instant. Su Zimo had lived in Sung Lang mountain range for an entire year and had seen countless demon beasts. However, he had never heard a roar as such. It was majestic and boundless, sweeping through the 9 heavens and all directions. This roar was filled with endless power and fury. Rumble. Boom. The entire godly mountain began to shake and cracks began to appear in the cave. Countless rocks rolled down and dust flew everywhere. This was a true landslide and earth-rending. Just the roar alone was enough to cause the godly mountain to crack and even show signs of collapsing. Against that terrifying roar, a blood mist burst forth from Su Zimo's body. The surface of his skin cracked and a series of blood scars appeared. It was a ghastly sight. Su Zimo grunted dully and his head felt like it was splitting apart as his face turned pale. The reverberating power of that roar was way too terrifying. Su Zimo's body was much stronger and tougher than most perfected Jin Dan's bodies. But now, against that roar, Su Zimo's body was on the verge of collapsing. His tendons were ruptured and cracks appeared on his bones. Even his organs were dislocated from the shock. If it was before Su Zimo cultivated the organs refinement section, he would have turned into a blood mist instantly against that roar without a corpse. However, when Su Zimo's body was severely injured, the essence energy that was rampaging in his body fused into his flesh, tendons, bones and organs. Initially, Su Zimo's body could not contain so much life essence energy. However, after this serious injury, the essence energy was indirectly sealed in Su Zimo's flesh. He could only wait for the future to refine the energy slowly. Night Spirit's situation was not much better. He was covered in blood from the shock of the roar and was on the verge of death. Even so, Night Spirit did not show any signs of fear. If Su Zimo were to observe carefully, he would have discovered that Night Spirit's gaze was extremely frightening right now. It was pitch black and exuded a faint killing intent. At the same time, a hazy gray fog rose around the gray-robed cultivator. There was an ancient aura within the fog, as though they had returned to the beginning of the world, to an era before chaos was formed. The gray-robed cultivator was the only god within. Jin Dan phenomenon. Although Su Zimo was not a perfected Jin Dan, he could tell the origin of the fog the moment he sensed the aura. Su Zimo had seen 2 Jin Dan phenomenons before. One was the ethereal sword Reign of Spirit Peak's master, Wen Xian. The other was the bone-corroding black wind of a perfected Jin Dan from the mysterious faction. This fog phenomenon was the third one that Su Zimo had seen. Su Zimo could sense that the energy fluctuation of the gray-robed cultivator's Jin Dan phenomenon was clearly much stronger than the previous 2. In fact, Su Zimo had a feeling that even if the previous 2 Jin Dan phenomenons were to join forces, they might not be able to defeat the gray-robed cultivator's Jin Dan phenomenon. The difference between them was obvious. So, that person is a perfected Jin Dan. A thought flashed through Su Zimo's mind. Using the spirit-peering art to check the gray-robed cultivator's cultivation realm, it showed that he was at early-stage foundation establishment, that was not accurate at all. Against the roar of the powerful living being, the gray-robed cultivator frowned and was forced to release his Jin Dan phenomenon to defend against it. Chapter 241. The roar did not last for long before it disappeared. However, an even more terrifying aura shrouded the surroundings of the godly mountain. Boom! There was a deafening sound. It was as though a gigantic living being had descended on the peak of the mountain, causing it to shake and look as though it could collapse at any moment. It would be a fool's dream if he wanted to escape at this moment. Su Zimo looked at the gray-robed cultivator. He believed that even if the gray-robed cultivator was perfected Jin Dan, he would not be able to escape. Unhurriedly, the gray-robed cultivator pulled out a gray tattered cloth from his storage bag. In a flash, the gray-robed cultivator arrived at a corner and covered himself with the tattered cloth. Right in front of Su Zimo, the gray-robed cultivator vanished and even his aura dissipated, as though he had fused into the corner without a trace. If he had not seen it with his own eyes, Su Zimo would not have believed it. It was as though the gray-robed cultivator had vanished into thin air. However, Su Zimo knew that the gray-robed cultivator was still here and hiding in that corner. Although the tattered cloth looked inconspicuous, it could conceal one's tracks and even aura without being discovered. That was the gray-robed cultivator's trump card. In the blink of an eye, Su Zimo was the only one left in the depths of the cave. He was all alone with broken eggshells that were licked clean. Anyone who saw that would be able to guess the truth instantly. Su Zimo did not have much time to think. The powerful living being on the godly mountain could descend at any moment. In a flash, Su Zimo arrived at the corner where the gray-robed cultivator was hiding and stood at the side expressionlessly. The gray-robed cultivator who was hiding well was initially waiting to see Su Zimo make a fool of himself. But when he saw that, he was shocked. Although the treasure on his body could conceal his figure and his aura, it could not withstand the impact of power or defend against attacks. If the living being outside the godly mountain were to see everything in the cave, it would definitely lose its rationality and descend into rage. At that moment, if the living being were to release a destructive attack in Su Zimo's direction, he would definitely be implicated as well. Instantly, the gray-robed cultivator understood Su Zimo's intentions. F***CK. What a scam! The gray-robed cultivator cursed inwardly. Even if he attacked Su Zimo now, it would be too late and he would expose himself. The gray-robed cultivator wanted nothing more than to send Su Zimo flying with a kick. However, he had no choice but to unfold the rag and pull Su Zimo in as well. Their figures and auras disappeared in an instant. As soon as this action was completed, a loud rumbling sound rang out as the divine mountain was struck by a huge force. The peak of the mountain was sent flying, and the cave was completely exposed. The moment the Blood Crow Palace's lord sensed the descent of that terrifying aura, he realized that it was already too late for him to leave and would only cause misunderstandings. Fortunately, he didn't enter the cave, so he wouldn't become enemies with the creatures here. Moreover, according to the guidance of the blood curse, Su Zimo was hiding in this cave. By the time the living being of the primordial ruin arrived, that lad would have nowhere to run and would definitely die if he was trapped in this cave. If everything went smoothly, the other party should not make things difficult for him after he revealed his identity. He would also be able to leave this place unscathed and this trip would be more daunting than dangerous. Roar! 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 Just as the Blood Crow Palace's lord had expected, a series of powerful roars followed right after the terrifying aura, piercing through the clouds and shattering rocks. A few breaths later, the primordial living being had descended on the divine mountain. Even though he was mentally prepared, the Blood Crow Palace's lord's pupils still constricted and his heart thumped furiously when he caught sight of the primordial living being with his own eyes. The primordial living being did not reveal its full appearance. However, it was only half of its body that was hovering above the divine mountain, almost covering the entire divine mountain that towered into the clouds. The massive and thick body coiled around the divine mountain once. It was a few thousand feet long and was filled with green scales that shone with a cold glint. Clang! Clang! A pair of huge claws protruded from the bottom of the body. Their bones protruded out and they were extremely sharp. They dug into the sacred mountain and instantly pierced through it. The horns on the primordial living being's head were prominent. Looking down from above, it glared with a pair of eyes that emitted a cold glint filled with killing intent. The primordial living being had whiskers beneath its chin and opened its mouth wide, revealing terrifying sharp teeth. Sticky saliva dripped from the sides of its mouth as it looked menacing. Dragon! That was a true dragon. The Blood Crow Palace's lord had once seen the form of a dragon in some of the ancient books in his clan. However, he was still extremely shocked now that he was seeing it for himself. The descriptions in the ancient books could not even compare to a 10,000th of what he was seeing with his own eyes. At most, the appearance in the ancient books was similar. However, the unique might and aura of dragons was not something that could be described with mere words. If Su Zimo could see that divine dragon right now, he would definitely recall something. Back before they entered the primordial ruin, the gray-robed cultivator had once said in a serious manner, "I've even seen a true dragon. Even though it's just a small portion of its claws, it's still shocking enough. That single scale is larger than our bodies and those claws are even longer and sharper than our flying swords." Back then, nobody took those words seriously. However, upon closer inspection, the appearance of the divine dragon was even better than what the gray-robed cultivator had described. The divine dragon did not use much strength and instantly, half of the divine mountain was sent flying. Everything in the depths of the cave was exposed to the divine dragon. The moment the Blood Crow Palace's lord took a look, his face turned pale and blood drained. There was no one. The depths of the cave were in a mess. A gigantic dragon egg was smashed into pieces and the juice within was gone. Even the eggshell was licked clean. However, there was no one. To be precise, there was someone else, him. A dragon egg was eaten by someone. Apart from the divine dragon that had just arrived, he was the only one left at the scene. There was no way he could explain himself. The Blood Crow Palace's lord was stunned. This was completely different from what he had expected. When the divine dragon caught sight of the eggshell scattered on the ground, its eyes surged with endless killing intent and rage that was about to spew out. Suddenly, the Blood Crow Palace's lord felt a chilling killing intent surge towards him. "No, it's not me," the Blood Crow Palace's lord was completely flustered. Although he was at the Void Reversion realm and could be called a Void Reversion Dao being with almost no opponents in the Great Zhou dynasty, he was still doomed against an adult dragon. The gray-robed cultivator who was hiding in the corner was stunned as well. Why was there another person here? This person is quite skilled and is a professional scapegoat. To think that he would rush over at this moment. What an accurate timing. The gray-robed cultivator muttered internally. Su Zimo and the other man hid in the corner motionlessly, not daring to lift the rag to check out the situation outside. However, when he heard the commotion outside, Su Zimo had a rough idea of what was going on. Just now, the person who was speaking should be the one chasing after him. Su Zimo wanted to lift the rag to check out the person's appearance and see what this primordial living being was. However, he maintained his rationality and held himself back. At this moment, any slight movement could expose the both of them. Chapter 242. Swoosh. The divine dragon spat out a breath in the direction of the Blood Crow Palace Lord, and a pale green mist gushed out from the dragon's huge mouth. Instantly, the surrounding air burned up. The green mist streaked through the void, distorting the surrounding space and distorting light. Dragon flames. The palace lord's expression changed as he exclaimed. Dragon flames was an innate ability unique to dragons. After every dragon was born and matured to a certain stage, they would naturally grasp this ability. Furthermore, as they grew older and their cultivation deepened, the power of their dragon flames would increase as well, even reaching a level where they could incinerate the heavens and boil the seas. That was a divine power of the legends. Even though the dragon flame before him was far from the level of a divine ability, it was not something that the palace lord of Blood Crow Palace could withstand. Slapping his storage bag, the palace lord took out a talisman and crushed it on the spot. Immediately after, the palace lord drew out a blood-colored bone staff. There was a skull embedded at the top of the staff and it gave off a sinister aura. Blood pattern curse. Waving the bone staff, the palace lord shot out 2 beams of blood light from the eye sockets of the skull at the top of the staff. As though it was alive, the skull opened its mouth and spat out a green beam of light. The blood and green light fused, forming a drop of fresh blood. The blood suddenly exploded, and a series of ripples appeared in the void, colliding with the oncoming dragon flames. Poof! 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 The 2 completely different powers met, collided, corroded and fought in midair, letting out a series of noises as 3 different colors of light burst forth in a bedazzling manner. Although Su Zimo and Su Zimo, who were hiding in a corner of the cave, could not see what was happening outside, they could clearly sense the terrifying fluctuations of the power. Even perfected being Jean Dan's gray-robed cultivator would die on the spot if he was caught in the aftershock of the fight between the 2 powerful existences, let alone Su Zimo. Su Zimo and Su Zimo's expressions were terrible as they held their breaths, not daring to make a single sound. The power of the dragon flames was clearly superior to the blood pattern curse. The 2 forces were in a stalemate for a moment before the dragon flames incinerated the blood patterns one by one and instantly descended before the palace lord of Blood Crow Palace. The Blood Crow Palace lord had already crushed a talisman, forming a defensive barrier around him. Crack! 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 After all, this was the highest grade defensive talisman amongst grade 5 talismans. However, it was still unable to withstand the corrosion of the dragon flames. Soon, cracks appeared on its surface, and it looked like it would collapse at any moment. Of course, after experiencing the continuous weakening of the blood mark curse and the grade 5 talisman, the might of this dragon flame had decreased sharply. Disperse! The palace lord of Blood Crow Palace waved his blood-colored bone staff once more as his eyes flickered with a green glow. Bang! After the Blood Crow Palace's lord attacked 3 times consecutively, the dragon flames finally dissipated into thin air. At that moment, the divine dragon soared into the sky and its massive body was fully extended. Exposed before the palace lord, it exuded a shuddering aura. The appearance of the divine dragon changed the weather. The palace lord's resistance caused the divine dragon to be even more enraged. Fellow Daoist dragons, we're both from the 9 races. I've intruded upon a treasure ground by mistake, please show mercy. The palace lord's face was pale as he shouted hurriedly. When he heard that, Su Zimo, who was hiding in the corner, felt his heart skip a beat. Dragons! Could the primordial living being outside be dragons? Could dragons truly exist in this world? At that moment, Su Zimo had an urge to lift the rag and take a look at the appearance of the dragons. However, Su Zimo resisted the urge. When he was studying in Pingyang town, he had heard many legends about dragons. Those legends were illusory and without any basis, they were merely myths that were passed down among the commoners. Su Zimo had never taken them seriously. In fact, before he met perfected being Tsang Lang, he did not believe that there were immortals in this world. Later on, Su Zimo embarked on the path of cultivation and was able to enter Misty Peak. In Misty Peak, Su Zimo had read some ancient books. There were almost no records of dragons in those books. Even if there were, they were extremely vague and limited. Piecing together the ancient books, one could obtain some limited information. Dragons were extremely terrifying living beings of the primordial era. They did not belong to the demon race and were a unique race known as dragons. According to legends, dragons were extremely strong and were incomparably glorious in the primordial era, reigning over the ages. However, for some unknown reason, dragons were destroyed in the long river of time and had long gone extinct, turning into legends. Su Zimo was still skeptical towards those records. In his opinion, since dragons once had such a dazzling and glorious civilization, they must have left some traces of their existence in Tianhuang mainland. Prior to this, Su Zimo had never seen one before. Until earlier on, Su Zimo's mind suddenly recalled the gigantic skeleton he caught a glimpse of in the sea of bones that seemed to stretch through the entire sea of bones. Could that be a dragon skeleton? When he thought of that possibility, Su Zimo was shocked. Frowning, Su Zimo recalled what just now said and another question flashed through his mind. 9 races? What's the 9 races that he's talking about? On the other side, when the gray-robed cultivator heard that, a glint flashed through his eyes before disappearing instantly. He's someone from the 9 races. Blood pattern curse, could it be? The gray-robed cultivator's gaze flickered as he guessed the identity of the Blood Crow Palace's lord. So what if he's someone from the 9 races? Even if you're a pure-blooded bastard with an impure bloodline, you'll definitely die if you dare to come here and eat the descendants of dragons. Suddenly, a deep and powerful voice sounded from the void. Every single word was like a thunderclap that shook one's mind. Swoosh! The divine dragon swung its tail. The dragon tail that was filled with green scales was like a thick divine whip that slammed towards the Blood Crow Palace's lord with an apocalyptic might. Ah! The Blood Crow Palace's lord was shocked as he exclaimed. Before the dragon tail arrived, a suffocating aura of death had already surged over. Biting his tongue gently, the Blood Crow Palace's lord spat out a mouthful of essence blood. After spitting out that mouthful of essence blood, the Blood Crow Palace's lord seemed to have weakened significantly as his eyes dimmed and he looked dispirited. Even if he could survive the divine dragon's tail after spitting out that mouthful of essence blood, he would have to recuperate for dozens of years before he could recover fully. Go! The Blood Crow Palace's lord chanted a series of obscure incantations as he waved his blood-colored bone staff and pointed forward. The blood light transformed into a gigantic skeleton that bit towards the dragon tail. At the same time, the Blood Crow Palace's lord took out a bunch of talismans from his storage bag and crushed them all. A pained expression appeared in the Blood Crow Palace's lord's eyes. He had collected those talismans for many years and had not expected that he would have to use them all in a single round. He was truly aggrieved in this battle. Initially, he was just chasing after a mere foundation establishment cultivator without any suspense. However, for some unknown reason, he was completely passive throughout the entire process and did not even manage to touch the sleeves of his opponent. It was as though he was led by the nose. For some reason, he ended up here, and even got targeted by a divine dragon. Chapter 243. Boom! The dragon's tail slammed heavily against the skull that was condensed, letting out a deafening bang in midair. Almost instantly, the skull was shattered by the dragon's tail and scattered into the world. Swoosh! The dragon's tail did not stop there as it whipped the palace lord viciously once more. Bang! 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 Even with the many talismans stacked together, they could not defend against the ferocity of the divine dragon's tail whip. The palace lord's glabella shone brightly as he released an incomparably strong spirit consciousness to defend against it with all his might. Bang! Like a kite with a broken string, the palace lord was sent flying instantly, falling from the waist of the mountain before crashing heavily onto the ground, stirring up a layer of dust. Exclamation point. The palace lord spat out a mouthful of blood and the blood drained from his face. His gaze was dim and many of his bones were fractured while his organs were ruptured. If he had not fought with all his might at the end, that tail whip would have turned him into a blood mist. The difference was way too great. They were not on the same level at all. It's true, it wasn't me. I just arrived and didn't enter at all. The palace lord endured the intense pain all over his body and gasped with a trembling voice. "Who else could it be if it wasn't you?" The divine dragon coiled in midair and looked down at the palace lord, questioning loudly. Its eyes were cold and filled with killing intent. Blood Crow Palace's lord took a deep breath of air. "Fellow Taoist of the dragon race, please listen to me. Initially, I came here in pursuit of someone. He must be the one who ate your descendant. He's the true culprit. I believe that he must have used some sort of camouflage to be here. He must not have gone far." When they heard that, Su Zimo and the gray-robed cultivator who were hiding in the corner felt their hearts skip a beat. They were so scared that they did not even dare to breathe loudly. The gray-robed cultivator knew that things were bad. While his tattered cloth did have the ability to camouflage, it was a little opportunistic. Be it the fact that the dragon egg was stolen or eaten, the divine dragon would definitely go berserk and lose its rationality after receiving such a blow. The first thing it would do was to search for the culprit. With the tattered cloth to hide their bodies and auras, it was easy for them to escape. Furthermore, the divine dragon would not have expected them to hide in the cave instead of leaving right away. This was a psychological blind spot. However, the gray-robed cultivator had not expected that Blood Crow Palace's lord would appear out of nowhere in the already chaotic situation. This person had chased Su Zimo all the way here. Relying on the blood curse power, he had deduced that Su Zimo was in this cave. That was the reason why the palace lord of Blood Crow Palace said that. If the dragons were to turn around and search the cave carefully, the tattered cloth on the gray-robed cultivator's body would be nothing more than a decoration. It would be easy for this rag to escape the detection of Jinren Jin Dan or even Jinying Jinjuan. However, trying to hide from the detection of an adult dragon was nothing more than a pipe dream. After the Blood Crow Palace's lord finished his words, the outside suddenly fell into silence. The atmosphere became extremely strange. The world seemed to have come to a standstill. A look of determination flashed through the gray-robed cultivator's eyes as he reached for his storage bag and put away the rag. At this time, if he wanted to continue hiding, he would only be deceiving himself. A talisman appeared in the gray-robed cultivator's palm. Lesser Transference Talisman. This was a type of talisman from the ancient era that had been lost by now. Even in the ancient era, the Lesser Transference Talisman was extremely rare and was extremely famous. Shredding the Lesser Transference Talisman could teleport a person thousands of miles away instantly. Although the landing point was uncertain, this kind of ability was enough to make every cultivator's heart beat faster. That was because it meant that cultivators with the Lesser Transference Talisman could escape from danger instantly and escape with their lives. The value of the Lesser Transference Talisman was self-evident. Every time one was used, there would be one less. For the current cultivation world, the Lesser Transference Talisman was priceless and could not be bought no matter how many spirit stones one spent. To be fair, the gray-robed cultivator's original plan did not involve the use of the Lesser Transference Talisman at all. However, the situation was pressing and he would lose his life if he did not use it now. The moment the gray-robed cultivator put away the rag, the two of them were exposed and stood in the deepest corner of the cave. Blood Crow Palace's lord blinked his green eyes and caught sight of Su Zimo for the first time. As for Su Zimo, this was also the first time he caught sight of this person who was chasing after him. Although it was a short time, both of them remembered each other immediately. The next moment, Su Zimo caught sight of the primordial life form that was hovering in midair. Pust! Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat and his pupils constricted as he gasped. It was way too shocking. If he had not witnessed it personally, Su Zimo would not have imagined that a life form could grow to such an extent and exude such a terrifying might and aura. In front of this primordial life form, Su Zimo actually felt a sense of insignificance and had the urge to prostrate in worship. It was as though the other party was incomparably noble and supreme. That thought suddenly surged into his mind, as though it came from the depths of his bloodline and was deeply rooted. Su Zimo frowned. He was extremely disgusted by that feeling. Unless Suzumo was willing to do so, he would not bend his knees to anyone, nor would he bend his spine. Suzumo narrowed his eyes with a burning gaze. Against the might of the divine dragon, he puffed out his chest with a hint of killing intent and sharpness in his brows. The moment that feeling of inferiority surged, Suzumo extinguished it. The change in Suzumo's body was extremely brief and happened almost instantly. However, the gray-robed cultivator still noticed it. The gray-robed cultivator looked deeply at Suzumo. For the first time, he felt that this green-robed cultivator was not simple. He was the only one who knew how difficult it was to break free from the might and aura of the dragons. Not only did it require an indestructible will, it also required a confidence that bordered on arrogance and a domineering aura that looked down on the world. There might be some cultivators who could fulfill one of those conditions. However, there were only a handful of people who fulfilled all three conditions. Suzumo before him was one of them. If Suzumo had already impressed the gray-robed cultivator, the black and ugly puppy in Suzumo's embrace was even more unbelievable. How is that possible? The gray-robed cultivator's eyes were filled with disbelief. There was no fear in the night spirit's eyes at all against the divine dragon that was circling in the skies with divine light and towering horns. The night spirit hid most of its body in Suzumo's embrace and only revealed a pair of pitch-black eyes. It had a calm expression as it glared at the divine dragon in midair coldly. The night spirit's gaze was a little strange and gave the gray-robed cultivator an indescribable feeling. The gray-robed cultivator remembered that gaze the entire time. Many years later, when the gray-robed cultivator found out about the origins of the night spirit, he recalled that gaze and came to a realization. Chapter 244. The gray-robed cultivator had always harbored a huge grudge against Suzumo. If not for this person, he would have stolen the dragon egg a long time ago and escaped unscathed. How glorious would that be for a divine dragon to be born in the future? But now, not only was the dragon egg gone, even his most precious and rare treasure, the minor transference talisman, was used. I've suffered a huge loss this time round. The gray-robed cultivator cursed internally. After crushing the minor transference talisman, his first reaction was to send Suzumo flying with a kick. He was filled with hatred. If not for that green-robed cultivator, would he have ended up in such a state? However, when the gray-robed cultivator sensed the changes just now in Suzumo's body and the night spirit's gaze, he changed his mind at the last minute. He decided to take the green-robed cultivator and the black dog away. That's the minor transference talisman. Blood Crow Palace's lord focused his gaze and instantly recognized the origin of the talisman. The minor transference talisman shattered. An extremely strange energy fluctuation burst forth from the gray-robed cultivator's palm. The entire space trembled violently. Immediately after, a gigantic vortex appeared behind the gray-robed cultivator. Its center was dark and deep, resembling a black hole. A powerful suction force acted on the gray-robed cultivator. Before he was pulled into the black hole, the gray-robed cultivator reached out and grabbed Suzumo's arm, pulling him in as well. Although the entire process seemed slow on the surface, it happened in the blink of an eye. Swoosh! Both of them were devoured by the black hole and vanished from where they were. Almost at the same time, the divine dragon that was initially in midair turned into a gigantic green beam of light and descended on the waist of the mountain, causing the entire godly mountain to crumble on the spot. Although the divine dragon's speed was fast, it was still a step too slow. Roar! The divine dragon was enraged and opened its gigantic mouth. Saliva dripped down and it let out a resounding dragon roar that reverberated through the world. Around the divine dragon's head, the sound seemed corporeal and condensed into ripples that spread in all directions, sweeping through the entire primordial ruin. Countless corpses in the sea of bones were so shocked that they jumped. Many strange skeletal beasts seemed to have been summoned, and all of them woke up. Even the bone dragon that pierced through the sea of bones was shaking its enormous body, wanting to soar into the sky. Just as the dragon's roar fell, another dragon's roar faintly came from a valley surrounded by a huge mountain range behind the sacred mountain. The dragon roar that came from the valley was neither loud nor resounding. However, it was filled with the richness of time, dignified and majestic. Ugh! The palace lord grunted and his expression turned even uglier. The dragon roar that came from the valley was faintly discernible, but it almost shattered his essence spirit. The numerous ferocious beasts made of white bones that had just formed in the sea of bones collapsed in an instant, shattering into numerous bone fragments that scattered all over the ground. The two dragon roars intertwined in the void, as if they were communicating something. The divine dragon in the sky above the divine mountain was extremely furious and roared crazily. The dragon's roar in the valley seemed to want to stop it. The dispute between the two sides became more and more intense. In the end, the divine dragon let out a final roar and turned into a ray of green light. It disappeared from the sky above the divine mountain and sped away from the sea of bones. There were many cultivators standing outside the primordial forest, pacing back and forth. Those cultivators were extremely cautious and did not dare to enter the primordial forest rashly. However, they were indignant to leave just like that. Before long, a loud roar sounded from the direction of the primordial ruin. A small number of cultivators frowned and sensed that something was amiss. A look of fear flashed through their eyes as they turned and left the place. However, most of the cultivators were excited and discussed fervently. They soared into the air and peered into the ruins repeatedly. That sound is so strange. I wonder what kind of ferocious beast it is. Judging from the sound, that ferocious beast isn't weak. It must be a ferocious beast from the primordial era and might have already gone extinct in Tianhuang mainland. If that ferocious beast dares to appear, I'll definitely take it down and sign a blood oath with it. Before long, a massive divine dragon with horns and a towering body crossed the sea of bones and the primordial forest. It arrived in midair aggressively and looked down at the vast land from above, emitting a terrifying might and aura as its eyes were filled with killing intent. Everyone was shocked. The cultivators who were initially in midair felt their limbs go cold and fell to the ground one after another. Thump! Thump! The cultivators who were standing on the spot knelt down one after another. Thousands of cultivators shuddered under the shroud of the vast dragon might. Their faces were pale and they kept quiet out of fear. Just now, the cultivator who said that he wanted to take down the ferocious beast was so scared that he peed and shit himself as he knelt on the ground and kowtowed with all his might. Roar! The divine dragon reared its head and roared. Poof! 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 Outside the primordial forest, thousands of cultivators exploded one after another, turning into meat paste and blood mists. They died on the spot. Just now, some of the cultivators who left were scared silly when they saw that from afar. It was way too tragic. Thousands of cultivators, including perfected Jean Dan, could not even withstand the roar of the divine dragon. In the blink of an eye, the area outside the primordial forest turned into a Shura hell with corpses and rivers of blood. The divine dragon hated those cultivators to the core. In its eyes, those people were no different from the two who escaped earlier on. The divine dragon sensed carefully once more before rising into the air. Soaring into the 9 heavens with a murderous aura, it sped into the distance and disappeared from the skies above the primordial ruin before long. It was only at this moment that the palace lord heaved a sigh of relief. He survived. Lying on the ground, the palace lord felt surreal and was in a daze. Thankfully, the divine dragon escaped in the end, or he would have died for sure. Standing up with great difficulty, the palace lord leaned on his blood-colored bone staff and dragged his severely injured body through the sea of bones, returning to the primordial forest. Master! The Blood Crow King had been waiting here for a long time. When he caught sight of the palace lord's tragic state, his expression changed as he hurried forward to support the latter. How did this happen? The Blood Crow King was stunned. Gritting his teeth, the palace lord's eyes were filled with endless hatred and he was so angry that he was trembling. It was only at this moment that he gradually regained his senses. Right from the start of this pursuit, he had already fallen into Su Zimo's trap. In the end, not only did he not manage to kill the lad personally, he even nearly lost his life. It was a complete failure. His injuries were extremely severe and he would most likely need dozens of years of recuperation before he could recover to his original state. Su Zimo, fufufu, you have to live on well and don't let anything happen to you. The moment I return will be the moment you die. The palace lord's expression was grim as he let out a series of laughter with a vicious gaze. The Blood Crow King stood at the side, not daring to make a sound. A long time later, the palace lord took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "Let's go back to Black Crow Mountain. Master, your injuries are too severe. It'll be difficult for us to pass through this primordial forest. Get your clansmen here. Even if those blood crows die here, you have to pave a path for me." After a moment of silence, the Blood Crow King nodded. Understood. Chapter 245. Suddenly, a gigantic black hole appeared in the void thousands of kilometers away from the primordial ruin. Two figures fell out of it and landed heavily on the ground, causing dust to fly everywhere. Su Zimo's physique was strong and he did not feel anything. Ouch! However, the gray-robed cultivator cried out in pain. Although he was a perfected being Jean Dan, his physique was not as strong as Su Zimo's. At that moment, he was grimacing and gasping from the fall. Surveying his surroundings, Su Zimo realized that they had already left the primordial ruin and arrived at a completely foreign place. Minor Transference Talisman. Su Zimo's gaze flickered as he murmured softly. He knew nothing about talismans and this was the first time he had heard of the name of the talisman. However, the ability displayed by the Minor Transference Talisman was an eye-opener for Su Zimo. Spatial teleportation. In Tianhuang mainland, most cultivators would have to set up teleportation formations in advance if they wanted to teleport. The higher the level of the teleportation formation, the further the distance it could teleport. Su Zimo had never thought that a seemingly simple talisman would be able to activate spatial teleportation. To be fair, if he did not have the Minor Transference Talisman in that environment, it would have been impossible for him and the gray-robed cultivator to escape. In Su Zimo's mind, he recalled that fleeting glimpse before he left the primordial ruin. Its massive, slender body was covered in green scales that looked like they were made of molten steel. Its head was menacing and its claws were sharp, every single part of its body was filled with explosive power. That resounding roar that could pierce through metal and stone could probably only be described as a dragon's roar. Was that really a dragon? Su Zimo looked at the gray-robed cultivator and could not help but ask. Everything that he had experienced today had completely exceeded Su Zimo's understanding of this world, the cultivation world and Tianhuang mainland. Even at this moment, Su Zimo could not believe that a living dragon had appeared before him. Furthermore, he was nearly killed by that dragon. When he heard Su Zimo's question, the gray-robed cultivator rolled his eyes and sneered, "What else did you think it was?" It really was a dragon. In the distant past, there was an incomparably powerful race called the dragons. Then, Su Zimo thought of something. Since that green creature was a dragon, then the huge egg in the depths of the cave was a dragon egg. I actually ate a dragon. Su Zimo was shocked. Or, more accurately, half of it. The other half was eaten by Night Spirit. The more the gray-robed cultivator thought about it, the more aggrieved he felt. When he heard Su Zimo mumbling to himself at the side, he was even more enraged and could not help but stand up. Leaning forward, he glared at Su Zimo and gritted his teeth. "You know that you ate a dragon too. Of all things to eat, why did you choose to eat dragon eggs? If you don't eat that egg and I steal it, it will definitely give birth to a divine dragon. Now, I haven't gotten anything." Before Su Zimo could react, Night Spirit, who was hiding in his embrace, suddenly extended its sharp claws with a cold gaze. It was as though it would attack without hesitation if the gray-robed cultivator made any strange movements. The moment Night Spirit extended its claws, the gray-robed cultivator felt a chill run down his spine. Sensing it, the gray-robed cultivator lowered his head and glared at Night Spirit, hollering, "Why? Black dog, are you trying to bite me? Look at how arrogant you are, eh?" Looking at Night Spirit's claws, the gray-robed cultivator narrowed his eyes and exclaimed softly. The thickness of Night Spirit's claws was almost the same as the hole on the dragon egg. "Great." Enlightened, the gray-robed cultivator said, "After all this time, you were the one who attacked first, black dog." When Night Spirit saw that the gray-robed cultivator was in a frenzy and did not seem hostile, it ignored him and continued sprawling in Su Zimo's embrace with its eyes half closed. The gray-robed cultivator's gaze lingered on Night Spirit and he fell into deep thought. Initially, the gray-robed cultivator thought that Night Spirit was just a dog. He even mocked Su Zimo for rearing a mutt as his spirit beast. However, from the looks of it, Night Spirit was not as simple as it seemed. Even ancient remnant beasts or pure-blooded ferocious beasts might not dare to eat a dragon egg, let alone a mutt. However, no matter how the gray-robed cultivator thought about it, he could not think of any demon beast that could match up to Night Spirit. Rubbing his chin, the gray-robed cultivator rolled his eyes and a thought crossed his mind. Right then, Su Zimo asked from the side, "I'm Su Zimo from Misty Peak. Fellow Taoist, may I know your name?" "Lin Xuanji." Most of the gray-robed cultivator's attention was on Night Spirit and he did not think much before replying. Su Zimo nodded and cupped his fists solemnly. "Thank you for saving me this time round, fellow Taoist. If there's a chance, I'll definitely repay you in the future." "There's no need for the future. Right now will do." Lin Xuanji smiled and pointed to Night Spirit in Su Zimo's embrace. "Fellow Taoist, how about giving me that mutt of yours as a form of repayment?" Even though Lin Xuanji could not tell the origin of Night Spirit, he could tell that this little thing had immense potential. Even if it was a true mutt, it would be able to transform into a ferocious and terrifying spirit beast after eating half of the dragon egg. Lin Xuanji could vaguely sense that if he could take Night Spirit away, he would definitely be able to make up for his losses this time round. "Night Spirit?" Su Zimo froze for a moment. He had not expected that Lin Xuanji would target Night Spirit. Su Zimo smiled. "It's not a problem if I agree. However, there's no way Night Spirit will leave with you." "Hee hee." Lin Xuanji chuckled strangely and asked, "Does that mean you agree?" "If you agree, we'll be even and we won't owe each other anything. How about that?" "Sure," Su Zimo nodded and snickered internally. He knew Night Spirit's temperament the best. The gray-robed cultivator would definitely be at a disadvantage if he dared to target it. "Great." Lin Xuanji patted Su Zimo on the shoulder and said, "As long as you agree, leave the rest to me. I'll show you what I'm capable of." Su Zimo smiled without saying anything. Lin Xuanji came before Night Spirit and asked with a grin, "Little black dog, want to come with me?" Night Spirit ignored him and closed its eyes, as though it had fallen asleep. Lin Xuanji raised the folding fan in his hands and tapped Night Spirit on the head, chiding softly, "You sure know how to act, little fella." Just as the folding fan was about to land on Night Spirit's head, Night Spirit suddenly woke up. Night Spirit raised its head and bit down on Lin Xuanji's folding fan, letting out a threatening growl from the depths of its throat. "Hey!" Lin Xuanji panicked and retracted his folding fan hurriedly. Night Spirit bit down hard and refused to let go. "Don't!" Lin Xuanji flapped the folding fan in his hands so wildly that his arm was almost dislocated before he managed to fling Night Spirit away. Su Zimo swept his gaze across Lin Xuanji's folding fan without batting an eyelid. That folding fan was a treasure. Given Night Spirit's bite strength, it could even snap the demon-suppressing rope. However, it did not leave a single mark on the folding fan. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.